Chapter 1. Keep the seat warm. For 10 years, I let a locker room full of kids believe I was finished. Nobody knew. That was the point. A veteran's tracksuit makes you invisible in a way a highlight reel never does. The young ones watch the new signing with the boot deal and the billboard, never the old man taping his own ankles in the corner. They'll say anything in front of the guy they've already written off, because a benched veteran is just furniture that used to run. I learned more about who Ashford Athletic really was in 10 years of being the last one off the training pitch than I learned in 12 years of every contract they slid across a desk and told me to sign fast and never read twice. This morning, the manager looked straight through me and said, loud enough for the whole bench to hear, "Do us a favor, old man. Keep the seat warm and stay out of the way." I laced my boots, exactly even. That night at halftime, they were going to read out the league record that had stood for 20 years, the one nobody in that stadium could break. And the name on the board was mine. But that came later, and I am getting ahead of the morning. Let me take you back to before the sun, to the only hour I ever trusted, because everything that happened in the 36 hours after started there, on the cold grass, in the dark. 5:41 a.m. I was on the training pitch before the floodlights had finished their slow buzz up to full. That was the arrangement I'd made with no one but myself over 10 years. I arrived while the world was still deciding whether to be a day. The gates were locked. I had a key I was not supposed to have. Tom had cut me one 3 winters back and told the office I'd lost mine, the first favor in a long ledger of favors between us. The grass was silver with dew and stiff with cold. My breath went out in front of me like something leaving a body. I set the ball on the penalty spot and stood over it the way my father taught me, not rushing, letting the pitch know I was there. Then I struck it. Thock. There is no sound in the world like a properly struck ball at dawn. It carries across an empty pitch the way a word carries across a still lake, clean, complete, no crowd to swallow it. The ball rose, dipped late, kissed the underside of the crossbar, and came down dead in the net. And the whole stadium heard it and said nothing, because there was no one in it but me and the memory of 80,000 who used to be. I jogged to fetch it. My knees told me their opinion of the cold, and I told them the same thing I always did, which was nothing, because you don't argue with your knees, you outlast them. I set the ball down again, struck it again, same corner, then the other, then the one my father called the postman's corner, low and inside the near post, the one that looks impossible from the stands and is only difficult if you don't practice it 10,000 times. You find out what a player is made of at dawn, on an empty pitch, when the stands are empty and only the work is left. I have said that sentence to myself more mornings than I have said good morning to another living soul. It is the truest thing I know. Anyone can play when the lights are on, and the cameras are hot, and the crowd is a wall of noise carrying you. That's not football. That's theater. The football is here, in the cold, in the repetition, in the 99 strikes nobody films so that the 100th, the one in front of the world, comes off your boot like it was always going to. The men who love the game come at dawn. The men who love being seen come when the seats fill up. You can tell them apart in about a week, and after 10 years I could do it before they'd taken their tracksuit off. I took 40 strikes that morning. I logged them the way I logged everything, in a notebook nobody was allowed to read, in a small, cramped hand. 38 in, 2 off. Both off were on the left, both fading a hair wide, and I knew why. I'd landed awkwardly in a 5-a-side 2 days back, and the ankle was speaking to me, so I made a note to tape it heavier and stop babying it. The notebook is not really about football. Or it is, but only the way a hymn book is about paper. It's about who did the work. It's about who I am when no one is keeping score, because that, in the end, is the only score that has ever mattered to me, and it is the one they can never take, no matter what they strike off a board. I want to tell you about the boots, because the boots are the closest thing I have to a confession. They were old, older than any professional had a right to wear, restitched by cobblers in 3 towns, restudded more times than I could count, the leather gone soft and dark as a saddle. On the inside heel of the left one, where no one would ever look, 2 initials were burned into the leather with a hot awl a long time ago, by a man who is not alive to burn them again. A.K. The kids, if they'd ever noticed, would have assumed it stood for the make. It didn't. It stood for a name I hadn't answered to in 12 years, a name that, said out loud in that changing room, would have stopped the clock in every man's chest. so I didn't say it. I laced the boots exactly even, left then right, and kept the name where I kept everything else that still had a pulse. Buried, warm, waiting. 6:14 a.m. Tom found me the way he always found me, by the sound of the ball, because Tom Adewale had spent 30 years listening to footballs and could tell a player's mood from the noise of his shooting. He came out of the tunnel mouth pushing a laundry cart with one wheel that screamed, a mug of tea in his free hand. In the club fleece he'd worn so long the crest had gone to threads. "You'll do your ankle," he said, not looking at the ankle, looking at me. "It's done already. I'm reminding it who's in charge. That's what my knee says right before it files a grievance." He parked the cart and handed me the mug without being asked. Sweet, strong, the way I'd never told him I liked it and he'd known for a decade anyway. That was Tom. The whole club walked past the kit man like he was part of the wall, and the kit man knew every one of them down to their sock preference and their sins. "Full session at 10, he said. "Cameras, sponsors, big smiley photo day before the big smiley match." I know. "You're not on the sheet for the photo." "I'm never on the sheet for the photo." "No," Tom said, and there was something in the way he said it, something careful, that made me look up from the mug. He was watching me the way a man watches a bridge he's not sure will hold his weight. He'd been doing that more lately, little glances that went on a half-second too long, as if some old shape in me was starting to show through the tracksuit, and he almost had the word for it and didn't want to. I filed it. Pass. Tom Adewale was, and remains, a pass, one of the few in that building who treated the powerless like they were people, which is the only test I have ever cared about, and the only one most people fail without ever knowing it was being given. That's the ledger, and you'll need it. I grade people. Not on talent. Talent's cheap. I've watched it come and go like weather. I grade them on how they treat the ones who can do nothing for them. The academy boy who can't get a game. The kit man. The cleaner who does the tunnel at midnight. The old veteran everyone's decided is furniture. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one, and once they've decided you're no one, they stop performing, and the real person walks out into the open, and I write it down. 2 columns. Pass, fail. I'd been keeping that ledger on the people of Ashford Athletic for 10 years, and the results would surprise the sponsors. "Ramsey's in already," Tom said, jerking his chin at the main building where a light burned in the top corner. "Before 6, him and Dawson and some lot in coats I don't know. Cars I don't know. Nice cars." He said nice cars the way you'd say bad smell. "Commercial director in before the ground staff. Never happens. Something's up, Leo. I've smelled it a week. They've got the look they get right before they tell us it's for the good of the club." He said it lightly, but it wasn't light, and we both knew it. "You'd tell me, wouldn't you, if you heard something?" "I hear everything, Tom. Nobody talks in front of the furniture." He almost laughed. Then he pushed his cart back toward the tunnel, one wheel screaming the whole way, and I was alone again with the ball and the cold and the first gray coming up over the east stand. Nice cars. Coats he didn't know. Before 6. I taped my own ankle right there on the touchline, sock rolled down, winding it the way Clara Singh had shown me years back. Figure of 8. Not too tight. Leave the flex. I did it myself because I always did it myself. The physio room was for players with futures. I had a past, and pasts don't need physios. They need tape and silence. I wound it and tore it clean, and while I did it, I watched that lit window in the top corner of the main building and thought about who arrives before 6 in a coat you don't recognize. Men in coats before 6 are not there to save anything. They are there to divide it. 7:30 a.m. By 7:30, the academy pitch had come alive, and that was the part of the morning I'd have paid to keep. The academy at Ashford was the last true thing in the place. Everything else had a price tag and a hospitality package, but the academy was still, at that hour, just kids and cold and the smell of grass, boys who lived a bus ride away and dreamed of the crest with a purity that would break your heart if you let it. Some would make it. Most wouldn't, and would carry the failure quietly the rest of their lives the way I've watched 1,000 men carry it. But the pitch didn't know that yet, and neither did they. And for 1 hour in the morning, it was the cleanest thing for miles. And then there was Miguel Vargas. You could pick him out before you could see his face, just from the way he moved. There's a quality certain players have. I've spent my whole life trying to describe it, and the best I've done is this. They seem to have a little more time than everyone else, as if the game runs at a different speed for them, as if the ball waits. Miguel had it. 16, all elbows and shins he hadn't grown into, and he had it. He received a ball at full stretch with the outside of his foot and killed it stone dead in the same motion, already looking up the pitch before it had settled, and I felt something in my chest do a thing it had not done in a long time, which was ache. Because I knew that first touch. I'd spent my whole life inside that first touch. And I knew, watching it in the gray morning, exactly how much danger it put him in. Because a gift like that at a club like this, in a season like this, isn't a future. It's a thing worth stealing. He finished the drill and, instead of sitting to spare his legs the way any sensible 16-year-old would, picked up the bag of loose balls and started collecting them for the coaches. Nobody told him to. Nobody was watching. Nobody except the old man on the far touchline, nobody was watching either. He gathered the balls and stacked the cones, and when a younger boy shanked one over the fence, Miguel went and got it. No fuss, came back grinning and said something that made the little one laugh. Pass. The boy did the invisible work, the work no camera films, the work that tells you everything. And he did it when he thought no one could see, which is the only time it counts. He caught me watching. Most of them, when they catch the old man watching, look away fast, embarrassed to be seen near the furniture. Miguel lifted a hand. "Morning, Mr. Stone," he called. Mr. 16 years old, and he called the bench warmer Mr. "Morning, son," I called back. "That first touch, show it to me off your other foot next time. They'll double you inside a year if you've only got the one." He looked at me a beat longer than he needed to, the way Tom had, the way people do when some shape shows through and they can't name it, then nodded, serious, filing it away. "Yes, Mr. Stone," he said, and went back to it, and I watched him try it left-footed, badly, then less badly, because that is what the ones who make it do. They take the note and go and fail at it in private until it's theirs. I stood on that touchline in the cold and made myself a quiet promise about that boy, and I didn't yet know what it would cost. 8:55 a.m. I heard the phone call I wasn't supposed to hear because I was where I always was, which was nowhere, in the mouth of the tunnel, out of the wind, changing out of my wet boots into the trainers I wore around the building so I wouldn't track studs across their nice floors. Scott Ramsey came round the corner with the phone at his ear, and he didn't see me, because he never saw me, because you don't see the furniture. He was pacing the way men pace when they're saying yes to something they know is wrong. "The vote goes through Thursday. That's locked," he was saying. "No, listen. Once the match is done, it's academic. Sterling's people have the numbers in the room already. We're just doing the theater." A pause. He laughed, a low, private laugh, the kind you'd never do a favor for. "The academy? Gone. Shut it end of the month. The land's the whole point. You don't buy a club like this for the football." His voice dropped, and I went very still, the way you go still when a ball's coming and you don't want to spook it. "The dead weight goes too. Ground staff, the old fossils on the veteran deals, the whole museum. Sterling wants a clean building." A beat. "Relax. Dawson's handling the story. Great club rescued by serious investors. Community first. All that. By the time anyone reads the small print, the ground's a car park and we're on a beach." He stopped. He put the phone away, straightened his coat, rearranged his face into the one he wore for cameras, and walked out toward the sunlight and the 10 o'clock photo. He passed within a yard of me and never once turned his head, because as far as Scott Ramsey was concerned, there was nobody there at all. Fail. I'd graded Scott Ramsey fail a long time ago, on smaller evidence, and everything I'd just heard was only the confirmation. But it is one thing to know a man is rotten, and another to hear him say gone about 100 boys' futures the way you'd say it about last week's newspapers. I stood in the cold mouth of the tunnel with a wet boot in each hand and let it settle into me, all of it, and did not move for a long time. The academy, gone. Tom and the ground staff and every old face who'd given the club a life, gone. The ground itself, the 80,000 seats, my father's pitch, the last true thing, a car park. And a name I had not said in 12 years, spoken like a landlord. Sterling. I had known that name would come back. I'd spent 10 years telling myself I hadn't, and I had known. 9:20 a.m. I want you to understand that I did not react. That is the whole discipline of the thing. 10 years of dawn on an empty pitch is not really about the shooting. The shooting is only the part you can see. It's about learning to hold, to take the blow and hold, to let them believe they've landed it, to keep your face flat and your boots even while the real work happens somewhere they can't reach. A younger man would have turned a table over. I laced my trainers and carried the balls in. Elena Croft was setting up the photo when I came through, clipboard, headset, the whole apparatus of a woman who managed the club's face for a living and had decided long ago that mine wasn't part of it. She saw me. She did see me, which was almost worse, and her eyes did the small flick of somebody moving an obstacle. "Not you," she said. "First team and sponsors. Can we get the—" She gestured at all of me without a noun because I didn't rate a noun. "The seat warmer out of frame. Thank you." And then to a colleague, not bothering to lower her voice, because why would you lower your voice in front of furniture? Honestly, the pensioner thinks he's still a player. I moved out of frame. I set the balls down neatly by the sideline where they'd be wanted. And I watched Arthur Dawson walk into the sunlight to hold court. I'll tell you properly about Dawson another time. I'd waited 12 years to tell it, and I wasn't going to spend it cheap. For now, the sporting director, the club's public savior, the man in every photograph with his sleeves rolled up like he'd built the place with his hands. He came out smiling into the cameras with Ramsey at his shoulder and the men in the coats, Sterling's men, I understood now, arranged just off to the side like weather. And as he passed the huddle of us who didn't rate a place in the picture, he said it, the line I'd come to know like a heartbeat, tossed into the air because he liked the sound of it. The game doesn't remember old men. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. And I stood there and let it land and thought, with a calm that would have frightened him if he could have seen it, "You have no idea, Arthur. No idea what the game remembers. Fail. In red, if I'd had red. 10 a.m. They took the photo. First team, sponsors, the men in the coats, everyone's teeth out, the crest gleaming. Community first. In 2 days, it would run under a headline about serious investors saving a proud old club. Every word of it a lie, and I was the only man in the frame who knew it, except I wasn't in the frame at all, which was the whole trick of my entire life now. 12 years ago, I was the best player in the league, and it cost me everything. I'll leave that there for now because you don't get it all at once. That's not how a wound tells itself. But carry that one sentence into what comes next, because everything I did over the next day and a half, every silence, every graded name, every strike at dawn, grew out of it like a plant out of a crack. I did the arithmetic standing there while they said cheese. The decisive match, the survival match, the one the whole town was living and dying by, was tomorrow, 3 o'clock. At halftime, per a league tradition older than the scandal that erased me, they'd read the division's all-time record over the PA, the 20-year record no living player had touched, and put the name on the big screen for 80,000 and every camera in the country. And the takeover vote, Sterling's vote, the one that turned the academy into a car park and Tom into a redundancy letter, was set for Thursday. But Ramsey had just told a phone that once the match was done, it was academic. The numbers were already in the room. Match, record, vote. All of it inside 36 hours, converging on one afternoon like 3 trains on one track, and not one person in that photograph understood that the tracks crossed or whose name was waiting at the junction. I looked once more at the lit window, empty now. I looked at Miguel, jogging in from the academy pitch, mud to the knee, grinning at nothing, 16 and already a thing worth stealing. I looked at Tom wrestling his screaming cart across the car park. I looked at the old ground rising up around all of us, my father's ground, the last true place, with a price on it now, and men in coats measuring it for tarmac. Then I looked down at my boots, at the 2 initials burned into the heel where no one would ever look, and I laced them again, out of habit, left, then right, exactly even. They had 36 hours to sell the only place that ever felt like home. I had 10 years of practice waiting in the dark for the right minute. Chapter 2. Pass/fail. The ball came off the wall at an ugly angle, spinning low and mean toward the corner flag, and the kid got there before it died. I was folding towels on the far side of the training pitch when I saw it. 6:40 in the morning, mist still lying in the goal mouths like spilled milk, and Miguel Vargas was out there alone, chasing balls he'd flicked off the rebound board because no one had told him to. That is the thing about the young ones who are going to matter. You don't have to tell them. They'd already decided, somewhere before they could talk, that the ball was the most interesting thing in any room, and everything after that was just geography. He controlled it on the half-turn, cushioned, moved it into space before his second touch, and struck it clean into the top corner of an empty net. No one clapped. No one was there. That was the point of what I was watching. He did it again, and again. And when he'd finished, he didn't jog off to the showers. He went round the pitch and collected all 19 balls himself, stacked them in the net bag, and dragged them back to the store because he knew Tom's knees were bad and the kit man would otherwise be out here at 7 doing it on his own. Nobody saw that. Nobody was meant to. That's how you know it's real. I marked it in the place where I keep such things. Not paper, not that morning. Just the quiet accounting a man does when he has spent 10 years learning that the scoreboard lies and the training pitch does not. Miguel Vargas, doing the invisible work for the invisible man, with no camera and no coach and no gain in it. Pass. First name on a clean sheet. You find out what a player is made of at dawn, on an empty pitch, when the stands are empty and only the work is left. I'd built a whole life around that sentence. Some mornings it was all I had. By 8, the place had stopped being honest. That's what the money does to a training ground the day the cameras are booked. Overnight, the corridor's filled with people who don't sweat. The sponsorship liaisons, the brand consultants, the young men in unstructured jackets carrying nothing but a phone and a lanyard, all of them moving with the busy emptiness of people whose job is to be near the important thing without ever touching it. Somebody had put out coffee in glass jugs. Somebody had hung a banner in the atrium with a word on it, vision, as though a word could be a plan. I carried the towels through the middle of it in my frayed gray tracksuit, and not one of them saw me. That's not self-pity, it's tradecraft. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one, and every single person in that building had decided I was no one years ago. So I moved through the important morning like weather, and I listened. Scott Ramsey was doing the sponsors by the trophy cabinet, our commercial director, our chief executive if you read the letterhead, though I never met a chief executive who smiled that much and meant so little of it. Silver at the temples, a suit that cost more than the Academy's boot budget, a laugh he could deploy like a corner kick. Precise, on demand, aimed. He had 2 men from a logistics firm cornered by the glass, and he was pouring warmth over them like syrup. This club is a community. This club is a family. You don't invest in Ashford Athletic, gentlemen. You join it. The men nodded. One of them actually put a hand on his heart. Then a kid came through with a delivery of Academy kit, one of the 16-year-olds, arms full, and Scott Ramsey didn't look at him, and the boy, trying to be careful, trying to get past the important men, clipped the edge of the coffee table, and a jug tipped, and coffee ran across the marble. The warmth went out of Scott's face like a light switched off. For God's sake. Low, so the sponsors barely heard it, and all the more vicious for it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Do you know what these floors cost? Get a mop. Get out of my atrium. Honestly, and he turned back to the logistics men with the smile snapping back into place mid-sentence, you have to watch the Academy ones, bless them. They mean well. They're just not quite house-trained yet. The sponsors laughed. The boy went scarlet and dropped to his knees on the marble with a wad of paper towels I'd handed him without either of us looking, and mopped up coffee under the feet of men who joked about him 3 feet above his head. He was crying and trying not to. 16 years old. I have watched a lot of things in this game, and I made myself watch that one all the way through, because you don't get to grade a man on his good angle. You grade him on the moment he thinks the powerless can't cost him anything. Scott Ramsey, warm to the men with money, cruel to the boy with a mop, charming to the room, contemptuous of anyone who couldn't do anything for him. Fail. I helped the kid carry the last of it out. He mumbled thanks to the floor. You did nothing wrong, son, I said, quiet, and he looked at me like the towels had spoken and went back to the kid's pitch where it was safe. The press had gathered by the media suite, and that meant Dawson had arrived. I'd never spoken a word to Arthur Dawson in the year I'd worn this club's tracksuit. That was deliberate on my part and beneath notice on his. But I had watched him the way you watch weather that's killed people you loved, from a distance, carefully, learning the shape of it. He walked into the media suite the way other men walk onto a stage they own, and the reporters turned to him like flowers, and he let them. Sporting director, the savior of Ashford Athletic. You could read it in every profile they'd written, and they'd written a lot. because he made sure of it. 12 years he'd been the man who cleaned this club up, who dragged it back from a scandal, who restored its good name. That was the story. He'd told it so many times it had grown a spine and a face of its own, and walked around the building without him. I stood at the back with a stack of clean bibs, and I graded him minute by minute. The truth is, he told the room, hands loose, voice pitched for the recorders. Sentiment is the enemy of survival. Everyone in this city loves Ashford. Love didn't keep us up last season. Love doesn't pay the wage bill. I did not become the most decorated director in this club's history by being popular. I did it by being right. A pause he'd rehearsed. People ask me why I'm not nostalgic. I'll tell you why. And here it came. The line I'd heard him say on television. The line I'd been carrying around inside my chest for a decade like a stone in a shoe. He smiled, warm, reasonable. A man sharing hard-won wisdom. The game doesn't remember old men. The reporters wrote it down. Of course they did. It's a good line. It has the shape of truth, which is the most dangerous shape a lie can take. He went on. He talked about difficult decisions, and the courage to modernize, and protecting the club's future. And every phrase was a door with nothing behind it, and the room ate them like bread. A young reporter near the front, she couldn't have been out of college, put up a hand and asked, careful, whether the relocation rumors were true, whether the academy was safe. Dawson turned the full warmth of his attention on her, and it was worse than the coldness, because it was so kind. The academy is the heart of this club, he said. I would sooner cut my own hand off than harm it. He let that sit, sincere as a hymn. Now, who has a football question? The room laughed and moved on, and the girl looked down at her notes, unsure whether she'd been answered or dismissed. I could have told her, both and neither, and the truth was the exact opposite of every word. I have watched that man tell a beautiful lie to a hopeful young face before. I was 30 when he did it to me. I have a very good memory, Arthur. I remember the old man your father's money made of me at 30. I remember the exact hour. But I stood at the back and folded a bib and let the line land on me and slide off, because banking a thing is worth 10 times shouting it, and I had learned that lesson at a cost he could not imagine. Fail. But I already had that one, from a long way back. They put me to work near the boot room after that, which was their mistake, though they'd never know it was one. The boot room is the oldest part of the ground, tucked behind the home changing room, low-ceilinged, the walls furred with old studs and older smells, dubbin, leather, the mineral bite of wet grass ground into concrete over 60 years. Nobody important goes in there. That is exactly why the important people stand just outside it to say the things they can't say anywhere with a microphone. They think the walls behind them are dead. They forget the game keeps its heart in the cheap rooms. I was in there relacing a rack of academy boots, on my knees in the half-dark, when Ramsey and Elena Croft stopped in the corridor a yard from the door, and a third voice I didn't know, smooth, older, out of breath from the stairs, said the thing that changed the weight of the whole day. He wants it clean, the stranger said. That's the whole point of the structure. The purchase completes, control transfers, and by the time anyone in this city works out that strategic relocation means the ground is sold and the academy is a car park, the paperwork's a year old and unbreakable. He's done it 4 times. Football clubs are the easiest asset in the world to strip. People are too busy loving them to read the contract. And the vote? Elena. Bright, hungry, the voice of someone measuring her seat at a table. The board votes during the match. Perfect cover. Full stadium, everyone watching the pitch, cameras on the game. Nobody's watching the boardroom. By full time, it's signed. Ramsey delivers the directors. Dawson delivers the story. Everyone gets what's coming to them. A dry sound that might have been a laugh. And your Mr. Sterling gets a club. Sterling. I did not move. I have trained for years not to move at the wrong moment. It is the single most useful thing a benchwarmer learns. I knelt in the boot room with an academy boot in my hands, and I let the name go all the way down and settle where the old stone already lived, and I did not make a sound. The academy's the sticking point, Ramsey said, and there was that scrape of contempt under the smooth, the thing only the cheap rooms ever heard. Sentimental drag. But the money's in the land, not the 12-year-olds. We frame it as investment. New training complex. Out of town, no complex, obviously, but by the time anyone checks. And the dead weight? Elena, delighted. The old ones? Payroll's a horror show. That physio's been here since the flood. And we've still got a first-team pensioner drawing a wage to sit down for 90 minutes. Cut them at completion. All of them. One line in a press release. They laughed, the two of them, low and comfortable, and the third man's footsteps went away up the stairs. One line in a press release. Clara Singh and Tom Adewale, and the 16-year-old with the mop, and every dawn runner on that misted pitch. Cut in a single sentence by people who had never once been out at 6 to see the work. I laced the boot in my hands, exactly even, the way I lace everything. And I stood up in the dark and I was very, very calm, which is the most dangerous thing I ever am. I did not have all of it yet, but I had the shape. And a man who has waited 10 years for a shape does not flinch when it finally walks past the door. I stayed on my knees a while after their footsteps died, in the dub and dark, and I let myself feel the whole thing the way you let a bruise finish blooming before you decide it isn't broken. The purchase completes. Control transfers. Cut them at completion, all of them, one line in a press release. I had heard men talk this way before, in rooms exactly this cheap, 12 years ago, when the thing they were selling for parts was me. It is a very particular sound, the sound of people planning to erase something they've decided has no defenders. There is a carelessness in it. They never lower their voices quite enough, because in their world the powerless don't have ears that matter. That carelessness is the only weapon the powerless ever get, and it is enough, if you're patient, if you've spent a decade learning to hold your breath. I had. I was. Elena found me on my way back through the atrium because, of course, she did. Status-obsessed people have a radar for the low status. It's how they take their own temperature. Oh, good, the seat warmer. She said it to the young media assistant beside her, not to me, which is its own kind of blade. She was maybe 30, immaculate, phone held like a scepter. Stone, make yourself useful. The directors want the trophy cabinet gleaming for the 3 o'clock shoot, and God knows the cleaners haven't touched it. Think you can manage a cloth without pulling something? The assistant laughed. Dawson had drifted over from the media suite, drawn to the small cruelty the way he was drawn to any camera. Ah, he said, looking at me for the first time in a year, really looking. The way you look at a hat stand, you're deciding whether to move. The veteran. Stone, is it? Remind me, what exactly are we paying you for? To be available, sir. I kept my voice flat and dull, the voice of a man who has stopped expecting anything. It's a voice I've perfected. It costs me nothing and buys me everything. Available. He found that funny. He turned to Elena and the assistant and the 2 reporters trailing him, and he pitched it for them. Generous, amused, a great man being witty about a small one. Do us all a favor, Granddad. Keep the seat warm this afternoon, polish the cabinet, and leave the football to footballers. There's a good man. He clapped me once on the shoulder, that horror of a gesture, ownership dressed as warmth, and steered his little audience away, already on to the next line. Elena lingered half a second to make sure it had landed. The cloth's in the store. Try not to breathe on the glass, pensioner. It fogs. Then they were gone, and I stood in the atrium under the word vision with a stack of bibs, and I let it sit on me. Here is what they will never understand. The Kesslers and the Nadias, the ones who spend their whole lives feeding on the moment they've decided you're nothing. When you humiliate a man in front of a room, you think you've taken something from him. You haven't. You've handed him something. You've shown him, for free, exactly who you are when you think there's no cost. And the man you've decided is furniture is the only witness in the building keeping the true books. Every one of those little cruelties is a charge laid in a wall. They light them for the pleasure of the flash. They never once ask who's holding the other end of the wire. I got the cloth. I polished the cabinet until the glass ran clear because I do not do a job badly to spite a small man, and because my father taught me that the work is the work no matter who's watching or why. Behind the glass sat the club's honors, going back 60 years, and there was a gap in one row where a board had been changed out years ago, a smooth patch of newer felt, a slightly wrong color. I've cleaned that cabinet 100 times. I never once let my eyes rest on the gap for longer than the glass required. I banked the day instead. Ramsey, cruel to the mop boy, fail. Elena, feeding, fail. Dawson, saying the line, taking the credit, selling the club with a smile. Fail, and fail, and fail. But those grades were old. What was new was the shape. A buyer named Sterling, a vote timed to a match, a whole community sold under a word. I found Clara Singh at the end of it, in the medical room, and she was the reason the day didn't close over my head like water. She was 50-odd, our physio, forearms like a rower's, glasses shoved up into gray-streaked hair, and she'd been at this club longer than anyone drawing a wage, long enough that the young ones didn't know she was a legend of a quieter kind. My ankle had been grumbling for a week and I'd said nothing, because saying nothing is what I do. But she'd seen me favor it crossing the car park, and she is not a person you tell nothing to. Sit, off with the sock. She had my ankle in her hands before I'd finished sitting, thumbs finding the old ligament, the one that was rebuilt years ago in a hospital under a name that wasn't Stone. She didn't know that. She frowned at it the way you frown at a familiar face you can't place. This is a lot of scar tissue for a journeyman, Leo. Somebody did serious surgery on you once. Serious. This is the kind of rebuild they do on a player they can't afford to lose. Long time ago, I said. Some club or other. She looked at me over the glasses, and there was something in it. Not recognition, nothing so dangerous, just the professional respect of one old craftsman for another's honest wound. She pressed, tested the joint, watched how it moved. You know what's strange about you? She wasn't asking. She rolled the ankle, and I let her see it work, the way a decade of dawns had kept it working. The whole building's written you off. The manager, that lot upstairs, the kids, old man Stone, furniture, keep the seat warm. I hear it. And then I get you on the table and... She shook her head and taped me, quick and clean and exactly even without me asking, the way I lace boots. You still move like you mean it. Under all of it, when you push off that joint, there's an engine in there the rest of them can't see. I've had a lot of players on this table in 30 years. I know the difference between a man who's finished and a man who's waiting. She had no idea what she'd said. She smoothed the last of the tape and looked up, plain and warm and entirely without an angle, the first person all day to look at me and see a person. You still move like you mean it, Leo. Don't let them tell you different. I did not trust my voice for a moment. 10 years is a long time to be furniture. It costs more than I let anyone see, and it had nearly all been taken back by a smiling man in the atrium an hour before. And here was a woman with gray in her hair and honest hands handing it back to me for nothing, the way Miguel stacked the balls, the way the mop boy said thanks to the floor. Thank you, Clara, I said, and meant it more than she could know. Pass. Clean sheet. Twice in one day. I laced my boot back on over her tape, exactly even, and picked up my bibs, and walked back out into a building that thought it had already thrown me away. The 3 o'clock shoot was setting up under the banner. Ramsey was laughing with the sponsors. Dawson was telling the cameras the game doesn't remember old men. Somewhere upstairs, in a room the cheap corridors don't reach, a man I hadn't yet met was moving pieces on a board he thought no one else could see. They had 36 hours to sell the only place that ever felt like home, and I had spent the whole morning learning I'd underestimated exactly how much they meant to take. Not just the ground, the academy, the old staff, the dawn runners, the boy with the mop, the whole living body of the thing, sold under a word for a fund with a name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in 12 years. Sterling. I turned it over in the dark all the way down the tunnel, studs on concrete, the sound of my whole life. Someone wanted this club gutted badly enough to buy it. After 10 years of silence, I decided to find out who. Chapter 3. The Night They Ended Me. The ball came to me on the half-turn, the way it had 1,000 times, and for a second the years fell off like mud from a boot. I want to tell it plainly without decoration, because a lie is what got me here, and I have spent a long time being careful with the truth. 12 years ago, I was the best footballer in the league. I don't say that to boast. I say it the way you'd read a scoreline off a screen. A fact, cold and settled. No argument left in it. I was 28. I had never worn any shirt but Ashford Athletics, and I was going to die in it. That was the plan. One club, one life, one name over the door. I scored the goals that kept them up and the goals that took them higher. And on a wet Tuesday, I'd stay after everyone else to do it again in an empty stadium with nobody to see. because you find out what a player is made of at dawn, on an empty pitch, when the stands are empty, and only the work is left. My father taught me that. He taught me everything that lasted. Alistair Finch cut the grass at Ashford for 30 years and coached the boys nobody else wanted after that. He had hands like a bricklayer and a memory like a match program. He could tell you the scorer of a goal from a game before I was born, and the name of the sub who set it up, and what the man did for a living once the game let go of him. He used to walk the touchline in the dark with a rake over his shoulder and say the same thing every time he caught me still out there when the floodlights had gone to standby. The game remembers the ones who love it, even when the scoreboard forgets. I believed him. I want you to understand that I believed him completely, because it makes what came next make sense. Why I stayed quiet, why I waited, why a man would let the world call him finished for 10 years and never once open his mouth to correct it. They struck my name off the honors board in the space of a single week. Here is how you end a man who has done nothing wrong. You don't fight him on the pitch. He'll beat you there. That's the whole problem. That's why you're doing this. You find the one thing he'll never do, and you make it look like he did it. The one thing I would never do was throw a game. Arthur Dawson was not the club's savior then. He was a sharp-suited nobody with a sporting director's business card and a backer nobody could see, hungry in a way that read, at the time, as ambition. I liked ambition. I mistook his for mine. He came to me 11 days before the end of that season, in the players' car park, and he did me the courtesy of not dressing it up for long. There was a game we were expected to win. Certain people needed us to lose it. He named a number. He said the number twice, slowly, the way you'd say it to a child or a fool, in case I'd missed how many zeros were on the end of my honesty. I told him the number didn't matter because the answer was no. He smiled. I remember the smile because I've spent 12 years learning to keep my face as still as he kept his. Marcus, he said, my name, my real name, in his mouth like a coin he was testing with his teeth. The game doesn't remember old men. It remembers results. One way or another, this result is going to happen. The only choice you've got is whether you're standing next to it or under it. I walked to my car. I thought I'd won. That's the part I can't forgive myself for even now, not the anger, the arrogance. I thought a clean man couldn't be caught by a dirty one. I thought the truth was a thing you owned, rather than a thing you had to defend with everything you had, every hour, forever. But I'd played the game long enough to know a man who has already decided the outcome, and something in the way he'd said the number a second time stayed with me on the drive home. So I did one thing right that night, before I did all the wrong ones. I had a habit in those years of carrying a little dictaphone in my kit bag. I'd talk my own game back to myself on the drive home. First touches, missed runs, the small things a coach won't tell you and the tape won't lie about. It had been running in my jacket pocket the whole time Dawson talked. I didn't decide to keep it as a weapon. I kept it because I kept everything, the way my father kept a rake by the door for 30 years. I just didn't wipe it. That's all. On the worst nights, I've thought that not wiping a tape is the only reason I'm still a man and not a rumor. We won the game. Of course we won it. I scored the second myself, a first touch to kill it dead, and a finish before the keeper had set his feet. And I ran to the corner where my father stood with his rake, and I pointed at him in front of 30,000 people, and he shook his head at me and grinned, because pointing was showing off, and showing off was not the work. 9 days later, there was money in an account I had never opened, wired from a name I had never met, timed and worded to look like a payment for the very result I'd bled to prevent. There were messages on a phone that was mine and wasn't. The number was mine, the words were not. There was a man, a stranger, who swore under oath he had passed me an envelope in that car park and described my coat, and the make of my car, and the rain. All of it true except the envelope. Dawson had been thorough. Dawson was always thorough. It's the only thing about him I'd ever call a talent. I did not know then that the account and the stranger and the wire had all been paid for out of the same deep, quiet pocket. That a man named Edward Sterling, who I never once saw, who dealt in rigged results the way other men deal in property, had bankrolled the whole clean-looking machine that ate me. Dawson built the frame. Sterling's money bought the wood and the nails. I only learned that later, in the long, dark years of learning things too late to use them. The hearing took a morning. That's the detail that still stops my breath sometimes, a morning. It takes longer to warm up properly. A career of 22 years, boy to man, one shirt, and they undid it before lunch. Banned. Erased. And here is the surgeon's cut, the part Dawson cared about more than the money. They took a stepladder and a cloth to the honors board in the main stand, the brass one my father polished on match days, and they lifted my name off it. Record holder, player of 3 seasons, gone in the time it takes to wipe a window. Where my name had been, there was a cleaner rectangle of brass, brighter than the rest, and for years that brighter patch was the truest thing anyone at that club ever said about me. Something used to be here, and someone worked hard to make sure you'd never know what. Then Dawson stood in front of the cameras with his still face and his good suit, and he said he had saved the club's integrity. He said it had cost him sleep, weeding out the rot. He used the word rot about me, who'd have crawled the length of that pitch on my hands for the badge. The press wrote him a halo. The syndicate that had paid for the knife got itself a hero to hold it. And Arthur Dawson, the ambitious nobody, became Arthur Dawson the Savior, on the strength of a lie with my name signed to the bottom of it. I lost the game. You understand that word differently when it's your whole life. Not a match, the game, the thing itself, the smell of liniment and wet grass at 6 in the morning, the thock of a struck ball in an empty ground. The one thing my father gave me that the world couldn't tax or trade. Gone, along with the shirt. I lost her too. I don't say much about that, even to myself, because self-pity is a slow leak, and I could not afford to run low. She was going to be my wife. She had a ring and a date and a belief in me that I had taken for granted the way you take for granted that the floodlights will come on when you flick the switch. She held on longer than she should have, through the account, through the stranger, through the mourning that undid me. But a lie repeated with a straight face by a man in a good suit is a heavy thing to stand under, and I gave her nothing to hold. I was too proud to plead and too gutted to fight, and one gray afternoon she asked me, not cruelly, just tired, whether I was sure, really sure, and I understood that the frame had done its final job. It hadn't just taken my career, it had reached into the one room they weren't even aiming at and put out the light there too. She left the ring on the kitchen table. I have never blamed her. I've spent 12 years making sure I'd earned the right to say that to her face, and I've never once had the chance. My father died 14 months after they wiped the board. I have never been able to lay the two things end to end and call one the cause of the other, because I don't want it to be true. But I know the shape of a heart that's been asked to carry more than it was built for. He never believed a word of it, not for a second, not to a single soul. He went on cutting that grass in straight, bright lines for a club that had branded his son a cheat, because the grass was innocent, even if the men above it weren't, and because leaving would have looked like agreeing. He'd come to me on the bad evenings, and he wouldn't talk about lawyers or appeals or newspapers. He'd talk about the game, the old scorers, the old subs, the men the scoreboard forgot, and he never did. I understand now that he was teaching me the last lesson while he still had time, that a name isn't kept safe on a board, where any man with a stepladder can reach it. It's kept where the work is. The club sent nobody. 30 years of his grass under their studs, and they sent nobody. I stood at the graveside in a borrowed coat, and I made him a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, out loud, the way he'd have wanted, no showing off, just the work of it. That I would not let the last true thing he taught me be a lie. The game remembers the ones who love it. I would make it remember. Not for me, I was past caring about me by then. For him, whose name they'd never even bothered to erase because they'd never bothered to write it down. So, why didn't I go to a newspaper? Why didn't I stand on the steps of the league offices with the proof in my fist and shout until someone listened? People ask that of the wronged as if silence were a kind of guilt, and I have thought about it every single dawn for a decade, so let me answer it properly. Because I had the proof, and the proof was not enough. That's the thing nobody tells you about being framed by careful men. Innocence isn't a document you produce, it's a war you have to win, over and over, against people with more money and better lawyers and a press that has already sold the other story and won't take it back. I kept everything. That's the part I did right. The one cold, clean decision I made while my whole life was on fire. The night The Wire hit that account, I copied the record of it before it could be dressed up. I kept the original recording of Dawson in the car park, made on a training ground dictaphone I used for my own notes. The tape where he names the number and names the game, before he learned to be careful, when he still thought an honest man was too stupid to bring a witness of his own. I kept the stranger's contradictions. I kept it all, sealed, in a box that has moved to every cold room I've slept in since. But a tape in a frightened man's hand, against a syndicate's money and a savior's halo, at a hearing that took a morning, I would have spent it and lost, and then it would be gone, and I'd have nothing left to guard my father's promise with. Evidence is a single shot. You do not fire it into the dark. You wait until the man is standing in the open, in the light, with everyone watching, and then you make sure he cannot duck. So I did the only thing left that my father would have called work. I disappeared. Marcus Frost went into the ground with his name off the board, and out of that grave, in a lower league changing room 3 divisions down and 200 miles away, a journeyman got up called Leo Stone. A frayed tracksuit, a beard the years thickened for me for free. A first touch I taught myself to hide, to make ordinary, to spend only in flashes when nobody was looking, because a man's touch is his fingerprint, and mine could hang me. Old Man Stone, the seat warmer. I played in car parks that called themselves stadiums, on pitches that took the skin off you, for managers who couldn't have picked the real me out of a crowd of 2. And every dawn, when the boys had gone home, I stayed and I worked, because the body forgets faster than the heart, and I was not going to let it. 10 years. 10 years of keeping a machine tuned for a race nobody knew was coming. 10 years of taping my own ankles in the corner while a locker room full of kids decided I was furniture that used to run. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. That is not a complaint. It is the single most useful thing that ever happened to me. Invisible men hear everything. And then, last summer, Ashford Athletic, the club that wiped me, the club that buried my father with an empty chair at the front, offered a 1-year veterans deal to an old journeyman called Leo Stone. A name on a spreadsheet, a body to fill a bench and steady the young ones, and never, ever matter. Nobody in that building connected the aging bench warmer to the ghost on the record no one could break. Why would they? The game doesn't remember old men. Dawson had built his whole life on that sentence. I signed it fast and I did not read it twice, and I walked back through the player's door I'd been thrown out of 12 years before, and I stood in front of the honors board. The bright rectangle was still there. They'd never filled it. In 12 years of new names and new saviors, nobody had put anything where mine had been. And under it, on the same brass, the league's 20-year record still stood, uncredited now, a number without a man, because you cannot strike a record off, only the name beside it. The number was mine. It has always been mine. It will be mine when I'm in the ground beside my father, because no one in that stadium, then or now, could touch it. I could have burned the place down that first morning. I want to be honest about that, too. The rage was still there, 12 years old and cold as a January pitch. But rage is not the work. So instead, I did what my father did with a rake in the dark. I started keeping the club, watching it, learning who they'd become in the years they thought no one who mattered was left to see. I gave every one of them a grade nobody knew they were sitting for, the way they treated the kit staff, the academy kids, the cleaners, the old men, the powerless, the invisible. Me. Pass. Fail. A 10-year vigil folded into a 1-year contract. Penance for the pride that let them catch me, and patience for the day the light would come on and catch them back. You learn a man in the last hour of the day, not the first. Anybody can be decent when the cameras are on and the sponsors are watching. I graded them for who they were once the building emptied, and only the furniture was left to see. And I was the furniture. I watched Scott Ramsey charm a boardroom full of money to its feet, and then, in the corridor, step over an academy kid mopping the floor as if the boy were a wet patch on it. Fail. I watched Elena Croft call me the pensioner to a laughing intern, and never once suspect the pensioner had a longer memory than her whole career. Fail. I watched Dawson shake the hands of men whose sons he'd have railroaded without blinking, and say, warm as a fire, that this club's integrity was the only asset he'd never sell. I filed every word. A ledger is only worth keeping if you're patient enough never to spend it early. Tom Adewale slid a fresh pair of laces into my locker without a word the morning mine frayed through, and never mentioned it. And never will. Pass. Clara Singh looked at me across a treatment table one gray afternoon at an old journeyman she'd never met before and said, "You still move like you mean it," and didn't know she was saying it to the only man alive who understood exactly what that sentence had once meant. Pass. I graded them all, minute by minute, year by year, and I let them go on thinking the seat warmer couldn't count. I told myself that was enough. Grade them, guard the soul of the place, keep my father's promise quietly, and let the record sleep. I told myself I could stay a ghost forever. Then I saw Miguel Vargas take the ball on the half-turn. The first time I watched that boy play, I had to walk to the far end of the training pitch and stand with my back to everyone for a minute because it was like being handed a photograph of a man I'd killed. Same gift. The touch that kills a ball dead and asks it a question in the same movement. The head up before the pass arrives. The graft nobody credits. First one out, last one off. Helping Tom fold the kit when the others had gone. Defending the old man's stone to lads twice as loud and half as good. He plays it honest. He plays it the way my father would have coached and the way I played before I learned what honesty costs. He is what I was at 19, before the car park, before the number said twice, before the morning that took a lifetime apart before lunch. And I watched Dawson watch him, and I saw the exact same still face he'd worn in that car park, and my stomach went to ice. Because a boy like that is a threat to men like them for the same reason I was. He can't be bought, and he can't be hidden. And one day soon, he'll be too good to leave out. So they'll do to him what they did to me. Not a car park and a number, they've grown more careful, and there's a syndicate back at the door with deeper pockets than ever. But the shape is the same. Find the one thing the clean man will never do, and make it look like he did it. Erase the honest one. Take the credit for the cleaning. I have seen the whole film. I know how it ends because I'm the last reel they left on the cutting room floor. That is what changed. Not that I found my courage, I'd had that, tuned and waiting for 10 years. It's that the machine that ate me is running again, right now, at scale, aimed at the club my father is buried beside, and at a boy who plays the way he taught me. And I am the only living man who has the proof to stop it and the reason to fire it. A vigil is a thing you can keep forever. A boy about to be erased is a whistle. When it goes, you go. They think they're selling a stadium and an academy and a fixture list. They think the old man on the bench is furniture. They don't know the record they can't break has been carrying their kit bags for a year. They don't know Marcus Frost never left the building. Arthur Dawson put his name on the lie that ended my career. Tomorrow he planned to sell the whole club with it. He was not getting away with it without me. Chapter 4. The Syndicate. The floodlights over the training pitch stayed on for 11 minutes after the last player left. I timed it once out of habit, the way you learn a keeper's kick or a fullback's blind side. 11 minutes of white light humming down on wet grass, and no one to watch it. Long enough to walk the whole pitch and collect the cones. Long enough, if a man moved slow and looked like he belonged to the cleaning, to be the only living thing on a training ground worth 40 million pounds and see everything the daylight was paid to hide. That night I let them burn. I gathered the bibs and the cones the way I had 1,000 evenings, one at a time, unhurried, an old man doing an old man's chore, and when the last car pulled out of the player's gate and the security barrier dropped behind it with that flat mechanical cough, I stood alone in the middle of the pitch and let the quiet come up through my boots. You find out what a player is made of at dawn, on an empty pitch, when the stands are empty and only the work is left. My father said something like it first, and I had made it my whole religion. But he never told me the same law worked in reverse. You find out what a club is made of at night, on the same empty pitch, when everyone who thinks they own it has gone home and forgotten they left the old man behind. They had never once wondered what I did after they left. That was the gift they kept giving me. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. And Ashford Athletic had decided I was no one so long ago that I had the run of the place. The last man off the pitch has keys nobody logged. The old man who tidies the boot room has a reason to be in the boot room at any hour, and the boot room shares a wall with the analyst's room, and the analyst's room is never locked, because who locks a door against furniture that used to run? I had 30 hours left, so I went to work. I started where careless people always leave the truth, the recycling. The blue bins behind the office block got emptied Tuesdays. It was Sunday night. 3 days of Scott Ramsey's shredder had failed him. Because Scott Ramsey was a man who believed a document was destroyed the moment it left his fingers. And Scott Ramsey could not be bothered to feed a shredder the glossy things, the printed decks, the hospitality folders, the courier envelopes with the return address already on them. I lifted a stack of it out with 2 fingers, the way you lift a wallet you're returning, and carried it to the boot room and laid it under the one bulb that worked, and read. The story they told the supporters was rescue. Everyone in the city had heard it by now. The club was drowning, the debts were real, and a generous investment group had come forward to save Ashford Athletic, to steady the ship, to secure the future. Dawson had said the word future 11 times in one press conference. Elena had put it on a graphic with a sunrise behind it. Rescue, investment, stability. The paper told a different story, and the paper did not care how it sounded. There was no investment. There was a purchase. The courier envelope held a summary sheet, an internal thing never meant for a fan's eyes, and the summary sheet used the honest words that men only use to each other. Acquisition of controlling interest, asset realization, site disposal, training ground and stadium land, wind down of non-revenue programs. It took me a moment to understand that non-revenue programs was the phrase a man had chosen, sitting at a clean desk with a coffee going cold, for the academy. For the 60 kids who came in the dark to chase a ball, because a ball was the one thing in their lives that told the truth. Non-revenue. My father had run that academy on a groundskeeper's wage and a coach's heart, and had called it the only part of the club that could not be bought. And here it was, bought, priced, marked for wind down, in a bin. I read the whole deck twice. The plan was not complicated because cruelty rarely is. Buy the club cheap by first making it look like it was dying. Starve it. Brief against it. Let the results slide until the fans themselves began to say, maybe a sale is for the best. Take control. Then take the pieces. Sell the stadium land to developers, because a football ground in the middle of a growing city is not a heart. It is square footage. Sell the training ground the same way. Shut the academy, because children who play for love do not appear on a balance sheet. And the results. This was the part that turned my stomach cold and steady. The results themselves were an asset. A club whose outcomes you controlled was not a football club. It was a machine for printing money in a market that ran on other men not knowing which way a game would break. Fix the results, own the wagers, strip the walls, sell the ground. Then move on, leaving a car park where 100 years of a town's Saturdays had lived. I knew the shape of this. I had felt this exact shape close around my own throat 12 years ago, in a smaller room, with a smaller prize. I had just never seen it drawn at this scale, on glossy paper, with a sunrise graphic. At the top of every page, discreet, embossed, a single gray mark. Not a football crest, a financier's monogram. The Sterling Group. I sat with that name a long time in the light of the one working bulb, my thumb resting on the letters the way you rest a hand on an old scar to be sure it's still there. Sterling. I told myself it was common enough. I told myself the world was full of blackwoods with money and no memory. And then I turned to the last page, the one with the signatures block, the one Ramsey had thrown away because it was only a draft, and I read the name of the man whose group was buying my father's academy to knock it flat. Marcus Sterling, son and heir of Edward. I did not make a sound. I have learned not to. But I sat there in the cold changing room smell of liniment and old leather with a printed page shaking very slightly in a hand I had trained for 30 years to be still. And I understood that I was not looking at a new enemy at all. I was looking at the second act of the oldest one I had. Edward Sterling was the money that had bankrolled Arthur Dawson 12 years ago, the quiet fund behind the frame, the hand that paid for the evidence they planted on me, the reason a man who refused to throw a game had his name struck off a board and his life taken apart before he turned 30. Edward had rigged one match and erased one honest man and taken a club's soul in trade. His son had simply grown the idea up, same playbook, rig the game, erase the honest ones, own the outcome. Only now the honest man was a whole academy, and the erased career was a 100-year-old club, and the frame was drawn across a whole city instead of one dressing room. The father had practiced on me. The son had gone into production. I put the pages back in order, exactly the order Ramsey had thrown them, and I slid them inside my jacket against my ribs, and I turned off the one bulb and stood in the dark of the boot room where the AK was worn into the leather of an old pair of boots on the bottom shelf that no one had ever thought to read. And I let myself feel it for exactly as long as I let myself feel anything. Then I stopped, because feeling is not a plan, and I needed the rest of the picture. I got it over the next 2 nights, one careless man at a time. Scott Ramsey came first because Ramsey was the loudest liar, and the loudest liar is always the easiest to catch. The analyst's room held the shared drive, and the shared drive held Ramsey's calendar, and Ramsey was too grand to imagine the old man tidying boots could read a calendar. There it was in plain diary shorthand, dinners with no club purpose, a hospitality box loaned to a name with no ticket, a private arrangement he had been sloppy enough to call, in his own notes, a consulting fee. Consulting. Scott Ramsey, who had once told a 14-year-old academy boy to his face that he was a charity case eating into the wage bill, was taking a private payment to push the sale through faster than the board could think. A kickback. Not for the club, for Scott. He had priced the town's Saturdays and skimmed his own cut off the top of the wreck. In my head, I wrote his grade the way I had written it for a year, cold and final. Scott Ramsey, fail. Elena Croft came next, and Elena was almost worse because Elena knew. The recycling gave me a printed run of statements she had queued for release, a schedule of them, timed like a bombing run, each one designed to break the fans' faith in the club a little more so the sale would land as a mercy. Poor results spun as terminal decline. A leaked worry about the wage bill. A quiet suggestion, never quite said, that the academy was a luxury the club could no longer afford. She was manufacturing the death so the buyers could call the burial a rescue. She had called me the pensioner to my face and the seat warmer behind my back, and she had sat at a clean desk and drafted the sentences that would tell 60 children the game had no room for them. Elena Croft, fail. Though I marked, because I mark everything, that in the margin of one draft she had written and then crossed out a single word, really? And that the pen had gone through it hard, the way you cross out a thing you're arguing with. I filed the, really? I did not know yet what it was worth. I had learned over 10 years that the first one to flinch is worth watching. And Dawson. Arthur Dawson did not leave paper because Arthur Dawson had been leaving no paper since before I had a beard and a false name. But Dawson left something better than paper. He left a pattern, and I had spent 12 years learning to read it off him like a defender learns to read a striker's hips. The board minutes, filed openly, because who reads board minutes but the old man who empties the boardroom bins, showed Dawson steering every vote toward Sterling with the soft, reasonable, savior's voice he'd used on the whole city. He was the inside man. He always had been. 12 years ago, he had been the ambitious fixer who did Edward Sterling's dirty work and took the credit for cleaning up the club. Now he was the celebrated sporting director softening the ground for Edward's son, and he would take the credit again. The man who steadied the ship, the savior, the realist who understood that the game doesn't remember old men. He would say those words to a camera within the week. I would have bet my restored name on it, if I'd had a name to bet. 3 grades all the same. And above them the buyer, the one I had not yet seen in the flesh. I did not intend to see him yet. I intended to stay furniture a while longer. Marcus Sterling had other ideas. He came on the second night, and he came the way money comes, without warning, after hours, when the building was supposed to be empty and therefore safe for the truth to walk around in. I was in the corridor outside the boardroom with a bin bag and a cloth, invisible, the last man in a building of ghosts, when the lift opened and 3 men stepped out. Dawson, Ramsey, and between them, half a head shorter than both and running the whole corridor without lifting his voice, a man in a charcoal coat that had cost more than the Academy's kit budget for a year. I knew him before Dawson said his name. Not from a photograph, from the walk. Edward Sterling had walked like that the one time I'd seen him, 12 years ago, in a corridor not unlike this one, on the night the world I'd built came down. A man who moved through a place as though it had already been sold to him and he was deciding whether to keep it. His son had inherited the walk along with the fund. They stopped a few feet from me. They did not lower their voices. Why would they? I was cleaning. The sight's the easy part. Marcus Sterling was saying, in a voice as smooth and warm as good leather, a voice built to reassure boardrooms. Land moves itself. It's the sentiment that's expensive. People are sentimental about grounds. You have to give them a story to be sad inside of, or they make one that's inconvenient. The story's handled, Dawson said. The story is nearly handled. Sterling corrected him without heat, the way you'd correct a waiter. And Dawson, Arthur Dawson, who had erased me and never once blinked, took the correction with his chin down. That told me everything about who owned whom. Sentiment plus a face is a movement. Sentiment plus a face plus a sympathetic reporter is a problem. I don't buy problems, I buy quiet. And then he did the thing I have carried since. He was still talking, some smooth line to Ramsey about timelines, and without breaking the sentence, without turning his head, without so much as registering that a human being stood 4 feet away, Marcus Sterling shrugged his charcoal coat off his shoulders and held it out to the side, into the air, into me, the way a man drops something he's finished with and trusts the world to have put a surface there to catch it. He did not look at me. That was the point of it. Looking would have made me a person, and I was not a person. I was a surface. I was the coat rack the building had provided. I took the coat. Of course I took the coat. 10 years of practice is 10 years of practice, and the whole art of it is that the hand is furniture even when the man behind it is on fire. The wool was heavy and warm, and smelled of a scent that cost money and of nothing human at all. I folded it over my arm the way a good old man does, and I stood, and I grated him. I have grated a great many people from inside the coat rack silence they put me in. I grade them by the one thing that never lies. How a man treats a person who can do nothing for him and nothing to him, when he thinks no one who matters is watching. That is the whole of it. That is who you are. Everything else is press release. Marcus Sterling, in the 4 seconds it took to shed a coat onto a man he had decided was no one, told me exactly who he was. And it was the same thing his father had been. And I wrote it in the ledger nobody could read. Marcus Sterling. Fail. Then, and only then, once the coat was already draped and the transaction of contempt was complete, he glanced at me. A short glance, the kind you give a lamp to check it's plugged in. And something in it snagged, some flicker, because a truly careful man is careful even about furniture, and Marcus Sterling was the most careful man in that corridor. You're the veteran, he said, pleasant, almost kind. Stone, the last old pro. Been here, what, a year? On a 1-year deal. He smiled, and the smile was worse than a threat because it had a threat living inside it, comfortable, unhurried. Long service. It's a shame what happens to long service when a place changes hands. The new owners rarely see the value in the old furniture. Loyalty's a lovely thing. He let a beat go by. But it doesn't renew, does it? It just runs out. Enjoy your last few weeks, Mr. Stone. Take it slow. Nobody's counting on you for anything now. He held out his hand, not to shake mine, God no, to take the coat back. I gave it to him. He put it on and stepped into the boardroom without another glance. Dawson and Ramsey pulled along behind him like a wake, and the door shut on the 3 of them, and I stood alone in the corridor, holding a cloth and the whole weight of what I had just been told. He thought he had put me in my place. He had. My place was here, in the dark, with the keys nobody logged and the run of the whole building and every single piece of paper his people were careless enough to throw away. And he had just walked past all of it to tell the coat rack it should be grateful. Nobody's counting on you for anything now. He had no idea. The name that held the record his father had erased was standing in that corridor with the whole scheme folded against its ribs, wearing an old man's cardigan, being told to take it slow. Enjoy your last few weeks. I intended to enjoy the next 30 hours enormously. I let a minute pass. Then I put my ear to the gap the old door had worn in its own frame, and I listened, because the last thing I needed was the one thing they were about to give me. They talked money for a while, timelines, the vote, how quickly the papers could be signed once the survival match was out of the way, and the fans were too gutted by a loss to fight. Ordinary evil, procedural, and dull. I nearly stopped listening, and then Dawson said a name, and I stopped breathing instead. There's one loose thread, Dawson said. The Reyes boy. A pause. Marcus Sterling's voice, unhurried. The Academy kid. He's popular, The young ones follow him. He's been talking to them, to the other academy families, and worse, to a reporter, one of the honest ones, asking why the club that made his father a supporter is being carved up. He's turning a wind down into a cause. Dawson's voice had the particular smoothness it got when he was about to recommend something he'd already decided. A boy like that, at 18, with a face the cameras like and a story that makes people angry, that's a problem before a match we need to lose quietly. Then he's not a footballer anymore, Sterling said, as simply as a man canceling a lunch. He's a variable. I told you. I buy quiet. Deal with the variable. I don't care how, a test, a leak, a paperwork problem, whatever your man in security keeps in his drawer for occasions. Just have it done before kickoff, and have it done so it looks like the boy did it to himself. A martyr's a movement. A cheat's a nobody. Make him a nobody. The chair creaked as he stood. Cut him. Then there's nobody left for the reporter to point a camera at except a car park. I stepped back from the door into the dark of the corridor, and I stood very still, and I felt the cold come up through my boots again, only this time it did not stop at my knees. They had looked at Miguel Vargas, the one clean thing left in that whole building, the boy who trained in the dark because he loved it, who helped the kit staff nobody thanked, who called me sir when the men in charcoal coats called me nothing, and they had decided he was a problem to be removed. A variable. They were going to do to him exactly what Edward Sterling had done to me. Manufacture a lie, make it stick, strike the name off the board, and call the erasure housekeeping. The same playbook, run again, on a boy who was me at 18 before I knew the game could be stolen. They had decided Miguel Vargas was a problem. I stood in the dark corridor of the club my father had loved, holding a cleaning cloth and the whole rotten heart of the thing against my ribs, and I made my own decision, and mine was older and harder and had been waiting 12 years for a boy worth spending it on. I decided Miguel Vargas was the future. One of us was about to be proven right. Chapter 5. The Frame. Miguel Vargas took a ball out of the air at 6:14 that morning like it owed him an apology and had come to pay. I saw it from the edge of the empty pitch, where I stood with a bag of cones nobody had asked me to carry. The kid was alone under the floodlights that hadn't been switched off yet, wet grass silvering his boots, and he was doing the thing that gifted people do when they think no one is watching, playing for the joy of it. A goal kick came looping down out of the gray. He let it fall, dropped his shoulder, killed it dead on the laces of his right foot so it sat still as a stone, then rolled it under his sole and sent it purring 20 yards into the top corner of an empty net. No crowd, no score, no reason. Just a boy and the game and the hush. You find out what a player is made of at dawn on an empty pitch when the stands are empty and only the work is left. I had watched that kid pass the test every single morning for a year. He came first and left last. He helped the kit staff hump the skips into the laundry when his teammates walked past them. He defended a washed-up veteran nobody else spoke to. He played the game honestly, which in the world I had learned about was the most dangerous thing a young man could do. They had decided to take it from him. I already knew that. What I did not yet know, standing there with my cones, was that they would start today. Pass, I wrote in the notebook nobody was allowed to read. Under Miguel's name, again. Pass. I laced my boots exactly even and went to find out how they meant to do it. 6:52 a.m. The performance suite at Ashford Athletic lived down a corridor the players never used, past the boot room and the recycling and the drying racks that smelled of liniment and old rain. Lewis Hayes ran it, head of security, performance analyst, a man who had made himself indispensable by knowing where every camera pointed and turning the ones off that mattered. He was the sort who nodded at you like a colleague and had already decided you were furniture. To him, I was Old Man Stone, the seat warmer, the pensioner in the frayed tracksuit who mopped up cones because his knees wouldn't let him do anything else, which meant I could stand in the doorway of the boot room, 40 feet from his glass office, sorting studs into a tray, and be as invisible as a shadow at noon. Dawson was already in there with him. Arthur Dawson did not do early mornings for football. He did them for business. He came in a coat that cost more than Tom Adewale made in a month, and he stood with his back to the glass the way men do when they've never once imagined being watched. I knew that posture. 12 years ago, it had been turned on me across a disciplinary table, that same untouchable straightness, while he read out a lie he had written himself and called it justice. "The game doesn't remember old men," he liked to say. He said it to the cameras. He said it, I think, to help himself sleep. I sorted studs, and I listened. "The board wants a clean deck by Saturday," Dawson said. "Sterling wants a clean deck by Saturday. That means no complications on the pitch and no complications in the stands. And the Reyes boy is a complication in both." Hayes had a report open on 3 monitors. "He's not doing anything wrong. That's the problem. Fans love him. 2 supporters groups have started a Keep Reyes campaign. There's a reporter sniffing around the academy story. Then the boy has to become a story we control." Dawson turned, and even through the glass I could see the thing that made him what he was. He was not cruel for pleasure. He was cruel for tidiness. A gifted kid who threw it all away. Sad, cautionary, over. Nobody rallies around a cautionary tale. "You want a failed test." "I want a failed test." He said it the way another man might order coffee. "Sample flagged, provisional suspension pending. He's off the team sheet for Saturday, he's out of the papers by Monday, and the academy narrative dies with him. By the time it's overturned, if it's ever overturned, we'll have sold the ground and shut the pitch, and it won't matter what a lab in another city says." I kept my hands moving in the tray. Aluminium studs, 6mm, into their slots. I had learned a long time ago that the body must keep doing something ordinary while the mind goes very still. Hayes didn't like it. I gave him that much. He rubbed his jaw. "The actual sample comes back clean, Arthur. It will, because he's clean. So we're doctoring paperwork on a real kid, and if anyone ever pulled the chain of custody on a suspended academy nobody." Dawson smiled. "You generate the flag, you log it, you file the provisional. The genuine result gets logged too. You can't make the original vanish. The courier's already scanned it. So you park the real one, and you make sure the version that reaches the manager and the league liaison is the version we need. 2 documents, 1 true, 1 useful. You know which one travels." That was the moment. Right there, in a glass box at 7 in the morning, Arthur Dawson told his weak link exactly how to hang them both. Generate the flag. Log the real one. Keep 2 documents. It was almost generous, how completely he laid it out. I have spent a great deal of my life being underestimated. It has taught me one iron thing. People who believe you are no one will do the most extraordinary things in front of you. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. And Arthur Dawson had decided I was no one so long ago he'd forgotten he'd ever done it. "Fail," I wrote. "Dawson." Hayes, pending, but the pen was already leaning toward it. "Have it done by kickoff Thursday," Dawson said, and left, and did not look at the old man in the boot room doorway with a tray of studs, because to him, I was a coat rack that occasionally moved. 7:40 a.m. I want to be clear about what I did next, because it is the hinge the whole thing turns on, and a lesser version of me, a younger, hotter version, the one they'd broken 12 years ago, would have got it wrong. 12 years ago, I had a chance like this, in reverse. The night before they came for me, a man I trusted had let something slip, half a sentence about a game that was already decided, and every young, righteous cell in my body had wanted to march into the chairman's office and say it out loud, name names, burn it down clean. I believed the truth was a floodlight you switched on, and the rats scattered. So I went loud, and early, and unarmed, and they were waiting for me with a folder they'd built over months. I walked into a room certain I'd win by being right, and I walked out with my name struck off a board and my whole life on the pavement behind me. Being right, I learned, is not a strategy. It is a bullet. And a bullet you fire before the target's in range is just a noise that tells them where you're standing. So this time I did nothing. Not nothing. I watched. All that day I watched Lewis Hayes build the frame, and I let him. He pulled Miguel in for a routine screening at 11, all smiles, and took the sample himself in a room with the camera conveniently down for maintenance. I knew it was down because I was the one who'd been told to prop the corridor fire door for the engineer who never came. The genuine result came back that afternoon on the courier's tablet, scanned and time-stamped and clean as spring water. I saw Hayes's face when he read it, a flicker of something that might have been relief in a better man. Then he opened a second file and began to type the useful version. Every instinct I own screamed to walk in and stop it, to take the kid by the shoulder and say, "Run, they're coming for you," the way no one had come for me. But I had learned what an early swing costs. 12 years ago, I'd been innocent and loud and certain the truth would save me. And the truth had been beaten to the ground by men who'd already written it down their way first. You don't stop a frame while they're still building it. You let them finish. You let them commit it to paper and to data, signed and logged and time-stamped, every hand on the rope. And then, only then, you show the world the rope. So I guided the noose, quietly. A frayed old veteran, always underfoot, always in exactly the wrong doorway. When the courier's tablet sat unattended on the counter while Hayes took a call, I did not touch it, but I noted the file name, the reference number, the time on the scan. When Hayes printed the genuine clean result to shred it and keep only the digital parked copy he thought no one would ever look for, he balled the printout and dropped it in the recycling by the boot room. My recycling. The bins the old man empties. I fished it out an hour later, smoothed it flat on the drying rack, and read Miguel Vargas, sample negative, no adverse findings in Lewis Hayes's own logged reference number, over the club crest and the courier's stamp and the date. They had made the true document and thrown it in my bin. I had 10 years of practice with paper men threw away. I have a place for such things. It went in with the rest, the sealed originals I have carried through 6 clubs and a decade of obscurity, the tape from the night they ended me, the honors board photograph with a name sanded off it. One more page in the file that would, one day, at a time of my choosing, be read aloud. Not yet. Let them commit fully. Let Hayes file the provisional suspension in his own login. Let Dawson put his name to the memo. The deeper the signatures, the harder the fall. I put the drying rack back exactly as it had been, squared to the wall, and went to help Tom with the skips. 12:10 p.m. Tom Adewale had been kit man at Ashford for 19 years, and he was the funniest, miserable man I ever met. He carried the club's whole institutional memory in his back and complained about all of it. That afternoon, he was wrestling a laundry cage that had lost a wheel, and I took the front of it without being asked, and we ran it down the tunnel to the drying room. Studs on concrete, the oldest sound in my life. At the door, he stopped dead. He wasn't looking at the cage. He was looking at my feet. "Take those off a second," he said. "What?" "Your boots, humor an old man." He wasn't smiling now. Tom's face had gone somewhere I hadn't seen it go. "You've been here a year, and I've watched you tape your own ankles every morning, and I never once looked at your boots. Then just now, out on the pitch, that touch you did for the kid, showing him the roll and strike, the one where you kill it under the sole and it comes up spinning." My chest did something it had not done in a long time. Tom. "I set out the boots in this room for 22 years. He crouched, slow, knees cracking, and turned my left boot over in his hands. Worn leather, resoled twice, the stitching I'd done myself. And inside the tongue, faded almost to nothing but not quite, 2 letters I'd never had the heart to cut out. A K. Tom Adewale knelt on the concrete floor of a drying room and went very still. "I set out a pair like this," he said quietly, 12 years ago. Same touch, same initials. I set them out for the best footballer this club ever had, the morning before they told him he was a cheat, and marched him out the door. And I've thought about him every day since because I never believed a word of it, and I never got to say so." He looked up at me. His eyes were wet and furious and glad all at once. "You daft, stubborn, brilliant man, you came back. You've been carrying my kit bags for a year." I could have lied. I had lied to everyone for 10 years, as a way of life. But there are men you owe the truth to because they gave you theirs first. And Tom Adewale had believed in me when believing in me cost him something and bought him nothing. "Keep it in the room," I said, which was as close to yes as I could get with my throat closed like that. "Keep it." He stood, wiped his face with the back of a hand, and then, because he was Tom, he laughed, wet and helpless. "You show up in a pensioner's tracksuit and let Dawson call you granddad to your face. Marcus Frost, do you have any idea?" "I know exactly what they're doing to the kid," I said. "I know all of it. That's why I'm here. And I need a right hand who can move around this club without anyone watching him. And there is not a man alive who knows these corridors like you do." Tom Adewale squared his shoulders under 19 years of other people's laundry and became, in one breath, the most dangerous ally I had. "Tell me where to stand," he said. "I've been waiting 12 years to be useful to you and I didn't even know it." "Pass," I wrote later, though I never needed to. Tom had passed the day he set my boots out and believed in the man who wore them. Some grades you carry from the start. 4:30 p.m. Clara Singh found me in the treatment room icing a knee that didn't need it because it was the one place a veteran could sit still without a reason. She was the club's physio, and she was the only senior figure at Ashford who treated me like a person instead of a fixture. She'd said it to me weeks ago, in passing, the highest compliment in her whole vocabulary. "You still move like you mean it." From Clara, that was a sonnet. She sat on the bench across from me and didn't reach for the knee. She'd stopped pretending to buy the injuries a while ago. "Long face for a man icing nothing," she said. "Old joints, old thoughts." She looked at me the way physios look, reading a body for the thing it's protecting. "They pulled the Reyes boy for screening this morning." I kept my face still. "Routine, I heard." "Nothing about that boy is a threat to anyone, and suddenly he's routine." She shook her head, and something old moved behind her eyes, something that had been sitting there a long time. "Can I tell you a thing, Leo? I don't say it to people here. They'd think I'd gone soft." "Say it." She was quiet for a moment, choosing the words like she was choosing where to press. 12 years ago, I was a junior physio at a club not far from here, and I watched them do this exact thing to a player. The best I ever saw. I mean the actual best. The kind you get once and never again. A one-club man. Honest to a fault. They put together a story about him, match-fixing, evidence out of nowhere, and it moved so fast and so tidy that everyone believed it before he'd said a word. They struck his name off the board and marched him out, and a very smooth man took the credit for cleaning up the club. Her jaw tightened. "I taped that man's ankle 100 times. I knew his hands, the way you know a patient. There was not one dishonest bone in him. And I stood in the corridor while they walked him out and I said nothing, because I was 24 and no one, and I have regretted that silence for 12 years. The ice pack was cold against my palm. I did not move it. "I never believed it," she said. "Not for one day. I always believed he was innocent, and I never got to tell him, and I don't even know where he ended up. Lost to the game. Just gone." She looked up and she smiled at me, tired and rueful, and she said the thing that opened a seam straight down the middle of my chest. "You'll laugh, but sometimes, the way you carry yourself out there, the way you're always the last one off the pitch, the way you watch everything and say nothing, you remind me of him. God knows why, a washed-up journeyman and the best player who ever lived. But you do. I have taken hits in my life that laid me out on the turf. None of them landed like that." She was sitting 3 feet from me, telling me she'd believed in me for 12 years, and she did not know it was me. She was mourning a man she was looking straight at. And every word she said was a gift I could not open. Because opening it now, today, with the frame still being built and the club still to be saved, would spend the only shot I had before the target was in range. So I did the hardest thing in the chapter. Harder than the boot room. Harder than the bin. "He'd have wanted to hear that," I said, "whoever he was. He'd have wanted to know somebody kept the faith when it cost them something to keep it." My voice held. I don't know how. "Don't regret the silence, Clara. Sometimes the ones who say nothing are just waiting for a minute that isn't there yet." She looked at me a beat too long. Something almost surfaced. I watched it come up behind her eyes and not quite break the water. Then she huffed a small laugh and stood and squeezed my shoulder on her way out. Physio's hands, sure and kind. "Ice that knee that doesn't need it, old man." "Pass," I wrote, when the door shut and my hand was not quite steady. Clara Singh. Pass, 12 years running, and she never knew there was anyone keeping score. 7:15 p.m. Night came down over the ground and I walked the empty pitch, the way I always did. Boots in my hand this time, grass wet and cold under my feet. The frame was set. Hayes had filed the provisional suspension at 5:40 under his own login. I knew because I'd watched the light in his office and heard him leave humming. Dawson's memo would be countersigned by morning. Somewhere in the building, the useful document was traveling toward the manager and the league liaison, and the true one The real, clean, negative result in Hayes' own reference number was folded flat in a file only I could open, waiting for the minute that wasn't there yet. They thought they'd removed the club's future. They thought a gifted, honest boy was a story you could edit down to a cautionary tale and shred the rest. They had no idea what they had actually done. They had done the one thing that guarantees an old man comes off the bench. They'd tried to erase the same kid I used to be, using the same playbook that erased me, run by the sons of the men who ran it the first time. Marcus Sterling's syndicate, Edward Sterling's method. Rig the game, erase the honest man, own the outcome. I had spent 12 years learning that page by heart. Now they were reading it to me out loud and calling it business. Tom was on the inside now. Clara had, without knowing it, just handed me the one thing I'd been missing. A witness who'd believed from the start, whose testimony would land like a struck ball when the time came. The evidence was sealed. The frame was signed. The noose was tied, and every hand on the rope was theirs. I stood at the center circle and looked up at the record board on the far stand, the one with the 20-year mark on it that nobody in the league could break, the name on it sanded to a ghost. On Saturday afternoon, in front of a full house and the cameras Elena Croft had invited herself, the announcer was going to read that record out at halftime. The takeover vote was set for the same window in the boardroom. The decisive match, the one that kept the club alive or killed it, would be on the pitch below. Three things aimed at the same 3 o'clock. They had lined them up themselves for their own convenience, never once imagining that the man who'd been carrying their kit bags for a year had spent 10 years waiting for exactly this collision. They were going to sell the club by full time. Full time was the deadline I had spent 10 years refusing to meet. Chapter 6. Dawn on an empty pitch. Rain came off the floodlights in threads that night, thin and silver, hissing on the empty pitch like the crowd had left something behind that couldn't sit still. I stood in the mouth of the tunnel with a kit bag over each shoulder and watched the water fall through the light and vanish before it reached the grass. And I thought about how many things do that. Fall bright, disappear before they land. 12 years of my own life had done exactly that, and I had learned not to flinch at it. But there is a difference between watching your own name evaporate and watching it happen to a kid who still believes the game is fair. They cut Miguel Vargas at 11 minutes past 10. Not a meeting, not a word to his face. A single line in an email that Lewis Hayes CC'd to 4 people and no one else. Subject line, Reyes, M. Provisional suspension pending review. And a locker that a junior groundsman had already been told to clear by morning. I saw the email because I was the last one in the analyst's office, as I am the last one everywhere, wiping down the whiteboard nobody had asked me to wipe, invisible in the way only a benched veteran with a mop can be. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They had decided I was no one a year ago, so they left the screen unlocked in front of the furniture and went to the director's box to celebrate. I read the email twice. Then I read the attachment. The doctored test, the flagged sample, the tidy chain of custody that Hayes had built backwards from the answer he'd been told to reach. I already had the originals. I'd pulled them out of the shredder bin 3 nights ago, uncrumpled them one strip at a time on the physio bench under Clara's desk lamp after she'd gone home, and photographed every page. The real sample, the real result, clean. A boy who trained hardest, taped his own shins because he wouldn't ask the kit staff to bend for him, and defended an old man nobody else would sit with, clean and cut, because his honesty was inconvenient to assail. Fail, I wrote in the notebook nobody is allowed to read. Hayes, in writing, signed. Timestamped ... I underlined timestamped twice, because a man who lies in permanent ink is a man building his own board of evidence. And Lewis Hayes had been building mine for a week. The pitch hissed under the rain. I picked the bags back up and carried them in. 10:52 p.m. The team sheet for the decisive match was taped to the tactics board in the manager's office, and it was a confession dressed as a lineup. I knew what a team built to win looked like. I had built them 20 years ago, with my own runs off the shoulder of the last defender. I also knew what a team built to lose looked like. Because losing on purpose has a shape too. It's just harder to see. The way a bruise is hardest to see the second before it blooms. 2 of our steadiest heads dropped to the bench with no injury logged. The fullback who never gave an inch shifted to a wing he'd never played. A midfield with no one to hold it. Gaps where the spine should be, drawn deliberately, the club's survival hung on a formation designed to concede. And at the bottom, in the reserve list, in the space where a veteran's name should sit as a matter of course under the squad rules, nothing. They had left me off entirely. Not benched. Off. Old man stone, not even furniture now. Cleared out with the rest of the dead weight before the room could see him move. That, I think, was the moment the last soft thing in me went quiet and cold and certain. Not the frame, not even the boy. It was the small administrative cruelty of a man crossing my name off a squad sheet because he had decided, for the second time in my life, that the game did not remember old men. Arthur Dawson had said that to a room of reporters 2 days ago, hands spread, smiling his savior's smile. The game doesn't remember old men. He'd said it 12 years ago, too, in a corridor to me, the night he ended me, softer then, almost kind, the way you'd tell a dog the vet was a treat. I have carried the sentence for 12 years the way you carry a stone in a boot you refuse to take off, because the limp is the point. It reminds you which way you're walking. I photographed the sheet. I photographed the room. Then I went to work. 11:20 p.m. Tom Adewale found me in the boot room with the strip lights buzzing and the smell of leather and dubbin thick as weather. He'd known who I was for 3 days now, since his hands went still on my old boots, the ones with AK pressed small into the tongue where a thumb wouldn't find it by accident, and he'd looked up at me with the whole of the past crossing his face at once. He hadn't told a soul. He'd just started calling me captain under his breath when no one could hear, like a man returning something he'd been holding in trust. "They can't do this," he said. "The kit's booked for a 20-man squad. The logistics are set. You can't just—" He stopped because we both knew you could. You could do anything if you owned the pen and the room and the story. Marcus Sterling's people have been in the office since 9. Ramsey's fast-tracking the papers. Elena's already drafted the statement calling it a bold new chapter. He said it like the words tasted of rust. They want it all signed by full-time tomorrow. Sale, relocation, academy shut, the lot, before anyone in the stands knows what they've watched. "I know," I said. "You know." He set the boot down hard. "Leo, Marcus, they've cut the boy. They've built the team to lose. You're not even on the sheet. What are we doing?" "Because I'll go loud. I'll ring every reporter I've got a number for. I'll stand in the car park and shout it. And they'll say the old kit man's finally lost it, and they'll have you out the gate by lunch, and the papers will still get signed." I kept my voice even the way I laced my boots. I've watched men go loud with the truth before. I've been the man they went loud about. Loud is easy to bury. You shout in a car park at midnight, and by morning you're the story, not the crime. They want someone to go loud early. It gives them something to point at. You go loud now, you spend the only bullet we have on a wall. Tom, listen. They've spent a week putting everything in writing so they could move fast. I let that sit. Everything. In writing. Ramsey's kickback, Hayes's forgery, the syndicate's real plan. They've built the whole thing at speed because they're sure no one's watching who matters. I picked up my own boots, turned them so the light caught the letters. "Someone's been watching for 10 years. Tom looked at the boots, then at me. Something in his shoulders came down off a shelf it had been on since he was a young man, and I was a name on a board. "Tell me what to carry," he said. That's the whole measure of Tom Adewale, if you ever need one. Everyone else in that building asked what they'd get. Tom asked what to carry. "Pass," I wrote later, though I'd graded him years ago and never needed to change it. Midnight. Miguel came back over the fence. I heard him before I saw him, the scuff of a training shoe on the wet perimeter path, the small, clumsy sounds of a boy trying to be quiet in the one place that had ever made him feel loud in a good way. He came through the dark toward the pitch, and he stopped at the edge of it, and he just looked at the grass under the half-killed floodlights they leave on for the cameras. A kid saying goodbye to the only field that had told him he was worth something. I stepped out where he could see me. He startled, then didn't. Because of all the people to catch him breaking in, Old Man Stone was the safest. "They cut me," he said. His voice did the thing a young voice does when it's holding a flood back with a door made of pride. "The test." "I never, Leo. I've never in my life." "I know. Everyone's going to think—" "I know what they're going to think." I walked out onto the pitch and he followed, because a boy will follow anyone who walks toward the thing he's afraid of instead of away from it. The rain had thinned to almost nothing. The grass gave that wet green smell up around our ankles, the one that has meant morning to me since I was smaller than him, and my father was the one who lined these fields by hand. Sit down a minute. We sat on the sodden turf like two men at the bottom of a well, with the sky a long way up. You want to know what a player's made of, I said. You don't find out on a day like today, with the cameras and the crowd and the sheet with your name on it. You find out at dawn, on an empty pitch, when the stands are empty and only the work is left. That's the only place it doesn't lie to you. I looked at him. You've been coming here at dawn for 3 years. Nobody made you. Nobody was watching. That's not nothing, Miguel. That's the whole thing. It doesn't matter now. It's the only thing that's ever mattered. I let the floodlight hum fill the space where I didn't say the rest. Go home. Sleep if you can. Be at this stadium tomorrow, in the stands, in a seat, where the cameras can see your face when the truth comes out. Can you do that? Can you sit still and trust an old man for 14 hours? He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, the exact gesture I'd made 20 years ago in a tunnel, and he nodded. And for 1 second I was looking at myself before they broke me. And I understood all over again why I'd come back to this place instead of dying quietly somewhere warm. Some erasures you don't undo for yourself. You undo them by refusing to let the same hand do it twice. He went back over the fence. I stayed on the grass until the cold reached the old scar in my hip, and then I got up, because there was a trap to finish, and it wouldn't build itself. 1:40 a.m. The clause was on page 9 of a contract they'd told me to sign fast and never read twice. They always tell you that. Sign fast, don't read it, it's standard. 12 years ago I signed fast 12 times and it cost me everything, and I had promised the stone in my boot I would never again be a man who didn't read. So a year ago, when they slid the veterans deal across the desk and Elena sighed at how long I took, I read every line. And on page 9, in the standard boilerplate nobody at Ashford had updated since the league changed its squad regulations, was a registration clause. Any player under a full professional contract, fit and registered with the league, could not be administratively omitted from a matchday squad for a fixture of competitive consequence without a logged sporting or medical reason filed 48 hours prior. There was no reason filed. There couldn't be. I had no injury, and "we don't fancy the old man" doesn't go in a league form. Dawson's people, moving too fast, sure no one who mattered was watching, had crossed my name off without doing the one piece of paper the rules required to make it stick. So at 1:52 a.m. I filed it myself, quietly, through the club's own league portal, from the analyst's office, under my registered name on the club's system, Stone A, a single automated squad eligibility confirmation that the system time-stamped and forwarded to the league's registration desk before anyone in that building woke up. No fanfare, no fight. Just a rule they'd overlooked, enforced by the machine they'd built to move fast, putting Leo Stone back on the matchday squad by regulation. They could scratch me off a whiteboard. They couldn't scratch me off the league's own record without a lie in writing, and they hadn't had time to write it. I didn't smile. But something in my chest set, level and true, like a spirit-level bubble finding its line. 2:30 a.m. Then the harder thing, the quieter thing, the first real move from the shadows. The league keeps an integrity officer, a tired, decent woman named Ease, who has spent a career watching people do to the game what Dawson and Sterling were about to do to my club, and who long ago stopped expecting anyone to hand her the truth cleanly. I did not call her. A call can be traced to an old man with a grudge and dismissed. Instead, I sent her one crumb, not the whole loaf, not yet, because a full dossier at 2 a.m. from an anonymous source is a thing you file under cranks. One crumb, chosen to be impossible to unsee. A single page. Hayes's forged chain of custody form for Miguel's test, laid beside the original I'd rescued from the shredder, same case number. 2 different results, both time-stamped, the forgery an hour after the real one. No accusation, no name attached to the sender. Just 2 documents that could not both be true, and a one-line note in block capitals. Ask why Ashford canceled a clean test to to cut a 19-year-old before a survival match being sold at full time. More will follow at kickoff. I'd learned in the obscure lower leagues that the honest ones don't need to be persuaded. They need to be unable to look away. You don't argue an integrity officer into caring. You put a thing in front of her that her whole career has trained her not to unsee, and then you get out of the light and let her conscience do the walking. Two case numbers that cannot both be true is not an opinion. It is a wound in the record, and a woman like Eze cannot leave a wound in the record alone. That is why she has the job. That is why they'll never buy her. Enough to make an honest official come to the ground tomorrow and stand where she could see. Not enough to tip the villains that the walls had ears. I was not exposing anything yet. I was setting a witness in the room, the way you position a defender before the ball's even played wide, so that when the moment comes, someone is already exactly where they need to be. Moving events without moving into the light. 10 years of practice, waiting in the dark for the right minute, and the minute was finally close enough to smell. By 3 in the morning, I held everything. I sat in the boot room with the notebook open and laid it out for myself one last time, the way my father laid out his tools before a match, so he'd never reach for the wrong one under pressure. Ramsey's kickback, the offshore acknowledgement he'd printed and binned, thinking a shredder in a locked office was the end of a thing rather than the start of a bin bag. Hayes's forged frame against Miguel, originals and forgeries, side by side, dated. The syndicate takeover, the Sterling Group's real terms, asset strip and fix and sell the ground and shut the academy, dressed up as rescue in Elena's bold new chapter. The original evidence from 12 years ago, the sealed proof that Arthur Dawson, bankrolled by Edward Sterling, planted the lie that ended Marcus Frost, struck his name from the honors board, and took the credit for saving a club he was quietly gutting. And last, my own proof, my signature, the record, the boots with a K in the tongue, and 20 years of a number on a board that no one in that stadium could break, because it belonged to a ghost, and the ghost had been mopping their floors, every thread in one hand. And here is the thing I understood, sitting in the smell of leather with the rain finally stopped. I could end it tonight, quietly, send the whole dossier to Ease, to the press, to the league, and by dawn, Dawson would be finished, and the sale would stall, and I could walk out the gate the way I'd walked in, unseen. I didn't want quiet. I'd had 10 years of quiet, and it had bought me nothing but the right to grade men in a book no one read. They had built the whole day for themselves. The packed stadium, the cameras, the halftime record announcement, their idea. A bit of heritage theater to warm the crowd before they sold the crowd's club out from under them. The 20-year record read out over the PA and flashed on the big screen for a nice photo the syndicate could use in a brochure. They had invited the whole world to watch. They had lit the stage, hired the lights, sold the tickets, and set the record to be read out at 3:30. So I would let it all proceed, exactly as they wanted it. The frame, the fixed team sheet, the vote in the boardroom, the record on the screen. Every piece of their day left standing, because a trap you spring in a dark room only catches one man, and a trap you spring in front of 40,000 people and a bank of cameras catches an entire syndicate at once. Let them read the record. Let them read my record, to my crowd, on their stage, with the cameras they'd invited pointed at exactly the wrong place. I would step into that light at the moment of their choosing and turn it around like a striker turning a defender who's already committed. Held. I wrote it in the notebook, just the one word. The held breath before the whistle, the stillness on the line before the ball comes in. The whole game hanging in a lungful of air you don't let out until the exact half-second the header goes. I heard them before I saw them, near 4, on my last round with the tray. Somebody in that building always wants coffee at the worst hours, and an old man with a tray is the most invisible object in the world. So when the light in the director's box was still on, and Elena rang down for a service, I carried it up myself. Because there is intelligence you cannot get any other way than by being furniture in a room full of people who think they're alone. They were alone as far as they knew. Dawson by the glass with the dark pitch below him, a picture of a man surveying land he'd already decided was his. Ramsey with his jacket off, loose and pleased. Elena with her tablet, drafting the bold new chapter in real time. And Marcus Sterling in the good chair, coat over the arm, smooth as poured concrete. the son of the man who'd bankrolled my ruin, wearing his father's confidence like an inherited watch. I set the tray down, poured. Not one of them looked at me. Sterling held his cup out to the side for me to fill without turning his head, the way he'd once handed me his coat, and I filled it. Steady, level, exactly even. "To the club," Ramsey said, lifting the cup. "To progress," Elena said. Dawson smiled his corridor smile at the black glass. "To clearing out the dead weight," he said, "before it slows us down." They touched their cups together, a small chiming toast to my erasure. In a box above a pitch my father used to line by hand, and the dead weight stood among them in a frayed tracksuit, pouring unseen, holding in one steady hand the whole of the day that was about to bury them. Sterling said something about the record announcement being a nice touch, sentimental, keeps the old guard happy while we sign, and they laughed, and I picked up the empty pot and stepped back toward the door. "Fail," I wrote in my head. 4 names in a row, minute by minute, the ink already dry on all of it. Fail, 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 fail. Then I carried the tray out and pulled the door softly shut behind me, so as not to disturb them. Down on the pitch, the floodlights they leave on for the cameras hummed over the empty grass, and the first gray of dawn was already lifting at the far end, over the stand where my father's fields used to catch the light first. I stood in the tunnel mouth where I'd started the night and let the breath I'd been holding for 10 years sit in my chest one more time, unspent. They set the whistle for 3 o'clock. They had no idea the record they were about to read out had been carrying their kit bags for 10 years. Chapter 7. The Name on the Board. 3 o'clock came the way a struck ball comes to a keeper who guessed the wrong way. Too fast, too true. Nothing left to do but watch it arrive. The stadium was full. I had not seen it full in a decade, not this club, not this ground. 26,000 of them packed to the rails, scarves up, a wall of pale blue that started singing before the players were out of the tunnel and did not stop. There is a smell to a full house that an empty one never has. Hot tea and cut grass and rain-damp coats, and something underneath it that I can only call hope. The particular hope of people who know their club is dying and came anyway to stand at the bedside. They had been told this was the survival match. Win and Ashford Athletic stayed up, stayed alive, stayed theirs. Lose, and the drop opened like a trap door, and everyone in a suit had already agreed what fell through it. What they had not been told was that the men in the suits wanted them to lose. I sat where I always sat. Number 16, dark tracksuit, the far end of the bench, close enough to the tunnel mouth that the cold came up off the concrete and settled in my knees. Old Man Stone, the seat warmer. I had my kit bag between my boots and my notebook in the inside pocket where it had lived for a year, and I laced my boots exactly even, the way I have laced them every match day for 22 years, and I watched the team sheet do its quiet, poisonous work. Because I had read the team sheet an hour before, in the tunnel, over Tom Adewale's shoulder, and I had known then that the game was already rigged to be lost. They had not been clumsy about it. Dawson was never clumsy. But I had spent 10 years reading team sheets the way other men read faces, and this one told me everything. The 2 honest midfielders who ran the whole engine of this side both benched, rested, a fiction nobody believed. A back line rebuilt overnight around a fullback who had been leaned on all week. A boy drowning in a debt the club's own people had quietly arranged for him to owe. Miguel Vargas, the best young player at this club in 20 years, not on the sheet at all, suspended 3 days ago on a fabricated failed test, cut before the biggest match of his life so he could not shine on the one afternoon the cameras were watching. And at the very bottom of the sheet, filed under substitutes, a name in small gray type that the manager had put there only because a clause in the league's own squad rules forced his hand, and that he plainly intended never, ever to use. Stone, A. They had built a team designed to go down with dignity, and they had handed me a shirt as an insult, never dreaming I would ask to wear it. High above the pitch, glass-fronted, lit gold against the gray sky, the director's box looked down on all of it like a jury that had already reached its verdict. I did not have to look up to know who was in it. Arthur Dawson, the club's savior, holding court. Scott Ramsey, our chief executive, all teeth and cufflinks, working a row of sponsors. Elena Croft at Dawson's shoulder with her phone. And behind them, in from the city for the afternoon, unhurried, a coat over one arm, Marcus Sterling. The takeover vote was set for the boardroom at 3:30, during the game, on purpose. By full time, the papers would be signed, the Sterling Group would own controlling shares of Ashford Athletic, and the plan the papers hid would begin. Fix the results, strip the club, sell this ground to developers, and shut the academy where my father spent 40 years teaching kids to love a game that would forget every one of them. They had timed it to the whistle. They wanted the sale done while the crowd was distracted by the funeral. In the stands behind the far goal, in a block the club had grudgingly given them, sat the academy kids in their training tops, and the old staff, groundsmen, kid assistants, the tea ladies, men and women who had given this place their entire working lives and were 3 hours from being told to clear their lockers. Miguel was up there among them, suspended, in the crowd instead of on the grass, watching the club throw away the season he had trained all year to save. I looked at him once. Then I looked at my notebook. Then I looked at the clock. Whistle. They kicked off, and Ashford went to work on losing. It was a horrible thing to watch, if you knew. To anyone else, it looked like a struggling team having a bad day, a misplaced pass here, a fullback caught upfield there, a defense a half-yard slow to everything. But I knew, and so I saw the choreography under it. The deliberate hesitations, the runs not made, the tackles pulled. I saw a good young keeper hung out to dry by men who had been told, in ways that leave no fingerprints, not to help him. The crowd groaned and did not understand. I understood. I sat very still and let it happen, because I had decided a long time ago that they had to be allowed to finish the crime in full view before I read it back to them. 26 minutes. A ball squirted loose in our box off a defender who led it, and their striker did not need a second invitation. 1-0. The away end erupted. Our end went quiet, that awful stadium quiet, 26,000 people making the sound of a held breath. In the director's box, I did not need to look to know they were smiling behind their hands. A goal down in the survival match. Exactly to plan. Everything on schedule. I opened my notebook to a clean page and, in the cold, with the crowd murmuring around me, I wrote the time. 3:26. Then I closed it again. Up in the glass box, a steward brought a tray of drinks in, and I saw Marcus Sterling lift a glass and touch it to Dawson's without either of them taking their eyes off the pitch. A quiet toast, 30 yards above the crowd, to a plan that was working. I had carried a tray exactly like that one into that exact room a week ago, unseen, furniture that used to run, and I had heard them toast the clearing out of the dead weight. They did not know that the dead weight had a notebook, and that the notebook had them, page after page, dated and initialed. A whole year of them writing their own report cards in front of a man they had decided was no one. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They had decided a long time ago. It was the last free thing I let them believe. You find out what a player is made of at dawn, on an empty pitch, when the stands are empty and only the work is left. But you find out what a man is made of at 10-4 in front of a full house, when the whole world has already written the ending and he stands up anyway. The half limped to its close, 1-0, the crowd sullen and betrayed and not knowing the half of why. The whistle went for the interval. The players trudged off past me into the tunnel, heads down, and the manager did not so much as glance at the old man at the end of the bench as he swept by. "Do us a favor, old man. Keep the seat warm. Stay out of the way." I stayed in the seat. That was the one place they would never think to watch. And then, exactly as I had known it would, because they had planned this too, the little pageant of it, the club's grand heritage moment squeezed in at halftime to make the sale look like a celebration of discipline rather than the burial of it. The big screen above the far goal flickered, and the PA crackled, and the announcer's cheerful voice rolled out across the ground. Ashford Athletic, a club of legends. This season marks 20 years since the greatest individual campaign in the history of our league, a record that has never been beaten, never been equaled, and still stands today. The screen filled with numbers, then with a name. The whole stadium read it at once. Adrian Kane. I heard it move through the crowd like wind through long grass, the name whispered, then said louder, 26,000 people turning to each other. Marcus Frost, the ghost, the one they'd erased. Older ones knew it in their bones and went pale with it. Younger ones knew it only as a story their fathers told. The great one who was here and then wasn't, banned, disgraced, vanished, gone. A name struck off this very club's honors board 12 years ago and never spoken by anyone in a suit since. And now the club, in its greed, had dug it up to sell tickets to its own destruction. They had read out my name to a full house. So I stood up. I did not hurry. I picked up my notebook and I walked, not to the tunnel, but out along the touchline, into the light, past the fourth official who did not know what to do with an old substitute walking the wrong way, out toward the halfway line where the television cameras lived and the director's box could see me, and the big screen still burned with the name. The manager saw me and started shouting. Security started moving. Up in the glass box, faces turned. I stopped on the touchline in front of all of them, under my own name in letters 10 feet high, and I spoke, not loud, but the ground had gone so quiet you could hear a program rustle, and the pitch-side microphones did the rest, carrying it up into the boxes and out to the cameras and into the boardroom where, at that very moment, a pen was being uncapped over the takeover papers. "The record isn't held by a ghost," I said. "The record is sitting on your bench." I looked up at the box, at Dawson, at Sterling, at all of them. "My name is Marcus Frost. I've been on your bench for a year, and I've been grading all of you." I heard Clara Singh, somewhere behind me by the dugout, say my name, my real name, in a voice like something breaking open, and I could not turn to her yet. Not yet. Because now came the part I had waited 10 years to say, and I said it the way I had said it 1,000 times to the empty stands at dawn, minute by minute, cold, exact, a report card read aloud. Lewis Hayes. I found him, our head of security, frozen at the mouth of the tunnel. 3 days ago you fabricated a failed test to suspend Miguel Vargas before this match, so a 19-year-old couldn't play the one game the whole country was watching. You did it on the club's own systems. You logged the doctored file at 11:52 on Tuesday night, and you never deleted the original, because you didn't think an old man empties the analyst's recycling after everyone's gone home. I held up my notebook. I have the original. So do the league's integrity officers. They're in the north stand. They've had it since this morning. Fail. 2 men in dark jackets were already moving down the steps of the north stand toward the tunnel. Hayes saw them, and the color went out of his face. Scott Ramsey. Up in the box, our chief executive had stopped smiling. "You've spent 6 months telling this city that selling the club was a rescue. You forgot to mention the 400,000 pounds routed to you through a consultancy that has 1 client and no office. A kickback, Scott, for pushing the sale through and keeping the board asleep. It's all in the transfers. Fail." Ramsey was on his feet now, saying something to the men around him, and the men around him were leaning away from him the way people lean away from someone who has just been named. "Marcus Sterling." I set it up into the glass, and I watched him, smooth, still, a coat over his arm, the only man in the box who had not moved. "You didn't come to save this club. You came to bury it and sell the plot. The Sterling Group's plan is to fix Ashford's results to serve your betting positions, asset strip the club, sell this ground for flats, and shut the academy, where every one of those kids up there behind the goal was promised a future you were always going to steal. It's all in the deal you were about to sign upstairs. Fix, strip, sell, erase." I paused. "I've seen that playbook before, 12 years ago, because it was your father's." The murmur in the crowd became something else then, something with an edge. "Edward Sterling," I said, "your father bankrolled the operation that ended me. Rig the game, erase the honest man, own the outcome. You're not even original, Marcus. You're just running your dad's con at a bigger table." And then I turned, one last time, to the man at the center of the glass, the savior. Arthur Dawson, who for 12 years had worn my ruin as a medal, who had built a whole reputation on the lie that he was the man who cleaned up Ashford Athletic. Arthur Dawson. My voice did not rise. It never had to, with him. 12 years ago, I was the best player in this league, and I refused to throw a match for your paymasters. So you planted the evidence yourself. You put fixing money in my name. You got me banned. You struck my name off that board up there, and you took the credit for saving the club's integrity by destroying the one man in it who had any. You've been telling everyone the same line for 12 years. I let the crowd feel it coming. The game doesn't remember old men. That's what you always said, Arthur. I reached into my kit bag, the one I had carried past all of them for a year, and I took out the thing I had kept sealed and safe for 12. The original evidence, the files, the recording, everything that proved the frame and everything that proved the syndicate, the whole rotten architecture in one envelope with my old life inside it. "Play the tape, Arthur," I said. "The one from the night you ended me." He came half out of his seat. I watched him understand in real time that there was nothing he could reach, no phone he could make, no order he could give that would get to the sound desk before the man already standing beside it. Tom Adewale, Kitman, my right hand, who had recognized me by a first touch on a wet morning 6 months ago and had asked me only one question since, which was when. Tom looked down at me across the whole length of the pitch. I nodded. The PA crackled again, and Arthur Dawson's voice, younger, 12 years younger, unmistakable, rolled out over 26,000 people, arranging the frame in his own words, naming the money, naming the men, naming me as the one to bury. He could not stop it. He had spent 12 years making sure this ground had the best sound system in the league so his triumphs would carry. Now his confession carried instead, up to the last row, out to every camera, into the boardroom where, I learned this later, but I felt it then, felt the whole building lurch. 3 directors stood up from the takeover table, and the pen went down on the papers unsigned, and someone said, loud enough for the minutes, that the vote was suspended pending the police. Here is what was happening in the boardroom while I stood on the grass, though I only pieced it together afterward from people who were in the room. At 3:31, the club secretary had laid the takeover papers in front of the board, and Marcus Sterling's lawyer had slid the pen across the table. At 3:33, the vote was called. 2 independent directors, decent people, kept in the dark for months, told this was the only way to keep the club solvent, had their hands halfway to the paper when the pitch side feed on the wall began to carry my voice into the room. They stopped. They listened to a benched veteran name the kickback, name the fix, name the strip and sell, name the academy they were about to shut. And then they listened to Arthur Dawson confess, in his own younger voice, to a crime he had built a career on hiding. One of them, I'm told, simply put the pen down and said he would not be signing his name next to that. The other stood up. A financier does not need to lose every vote. He only needs to lose the room, and Marcus Sterling lost the room in the 90 seconds it took a tape to play. The syndicate deal died in that room while the crowd was still gasping in this one. The stadium came apart. Not in violence, never that, but in sound. A roar that started at the front and rolled to the back and came down onto the pitch like weather. 26,000 people on their feet. And I stood in the middle of it under my own name and let it break over me for the first time in 12 years. The integrity officers reached Hayes. Ramsey was being walked, very pale, out of the box. And down on the touchline, the manager, the man who had told me to stay out of the way, was staring at me like a drowning man who has just seen the only rope, because his team was a goal down in a match he suddenly, desperately, needed to win for entirely different reasons than the ones he'd been paid to lose it. Clara was beside me now. She had my sleeve in her hand. Her eyes were wet and furious and shining. "It was you," she said. "It was always you." "Reinstate Miguel Vargas," I said loud, to the officials, to the manager, to the board members already scrambling to be on the right side of history. "The suspension was a fraud. You heard it. He plays." They did not argue. Nobody argued with anything in that stadium in that 10 minutes. Up in the crowd behind the goal, a boy in a training top was being pushed and pulled and lifted by the old staff around him, and they got him down onto the pitch, and someone found him a shirt, and Miguel Vargas came onto the grass for the second half of the survival match with his whole face undone. And the manager, hoarse, gestured at me, at the old man, the seat warmer, number 16, and there was nothing in his eyes now but a plea. "Can you still play? You find out what a player is made of at dawn, on an empty pitch, when the stands are empty and only the work is left." I had been finding out every dawn for 10 years, alone, in the dark, so that when this exact minute came, I would have my answer ready. "Watch," I said. I pulled the tracksuit top over my head. Underneath, the shirt. On my feet, the boots I had worn for 12 years. the initials stitched inside the tongue where only I could see them. A K. The second half was 45 minutes long, and I remember all of it and none of it. I remember the roar every time I touched the ball, the crowd learning, touch by touch, that the stories were true, that the old man moved like the record was real because the record was him. I remember Miguel beside me, playing the game the honest way, the only way either of us knew, the young one and the erased one running the same lines 20 years apart. I remember the honest midfielders coming off the bench at last, because now, at last, the club wanted to win. And I remember the 88th minute. A ball rolled to me 30 yards out, the way one had rolled to me 10,000 times on empty dawn pitches, with no one watching and only the work left. I took it with the outside of my boot, the first touch Tom had known me by, the touch that is mine and no one else's, and I set it down in front of me, and the whole of it came back, all 12 years, all the taping of my own ankles in cold corners, all the dawns. I looked up once. I did not need to. I hit it the way my father taught me, on a training pitch that they had been 3 hours from bulldozing, and it went in off the underside of the bar with a sound like a door closing on an old life. 2-1. I did not celebrate. I stood in the noise with my arms at my sides and let it happen to me. Ashford Athletic won the survival match. The club stayed up. The club stayed alive. The club stayed theirs. And somewhere above me, a boardroom full of ruined men sat over unsigned papers, while the ground that was no longer for sale shook itself apart with joy. They read out my name at halftime to sell a funeral. I had spent 10 years learning their faces. Now, for the first time, the whole stadium learned mine. Chapter 8. What the Game Remembers. The morning after, the grass was wet the way it always was, and for the first time in 12 years, no part of me was hiding when I walked out onto it. I came at dawn because I did not know how to come any other way. The stadium was empty. The floodlights were off. Somewhere behind me, a cleaner was dragging bin bags across concrete, and the sound of studs on stone came back to me the way it always did, like a memory that never learned to leave. I stood on the center circle where the night before 11,000 people had learned my name, and I let the quiet have me. The roar is not the thing. The roar is what other people give you. The quiet is what you keep. My father taught me that with a rake in his hands and mud to his elbows, and I had spent a decade proving him right in places with no cameras at all. They found me there, of course. They always found me there. Clara came first. I heard her before I saw her. The particular unhurried tread of a physio who has spent 30 years walking onto pitches to kneel beside people who are frightened. She stopped at the edge of the technical area and did not come further, the way you stop at the edge of something you are not sure you are allowed to walk into. In the flat gray light, she looked at me the way you look at a photograph you have been carrying folded in a wallet for so long you have stopped seeing the face and started seeing only the fold. 12 years, she said. About that, you were on my table. Her voice did not shake, which was how I knew how much it cost her. The night it happened, you had a strapped ankle and you kept telling me you were fine, so you could go and find someone and make them listen. And I was 26 and terrified, and I taped you up and I let you go, and I watched them take you apart on the news for a month, and I thought, I know that man. That is not a man who throws games. That is a man who tapes his own ankles even numbers because he can't help it. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. And then you were gone. And I never got to say it to anyone who mattered. You're saying it now. I always knew you didn't do it. She looked straight at me, and there was nothing saccharine in it, nothing of the reunion they put in films. It was flatter and heavier and truer than that. I just never thought I'd get to say it to your face. I have been hit by defenders twice my size. Nothing has ever landed in me the way that landed. I did not have a clever thing to say, and for once I did not reach for one. I said her name. Just that. And she nodded like it was an answer, because between the two of us, it was. You still move like you mean it, she said, and turned it into something ordinary, and that was a kindness too. So do you, I said, and she almost laughed, and we stood on the wet grass in the dawn and did not touch, and it was the closest thing to being home I had felt since they took the word away from me. There would be time. That was the thing I understood standing there, the thing 12 years of taping my own ankles in cold corners had almost taught me to stop believing. There would be mornings after this one. She would come to the touchline again, and I would still be there, and neither of us would have to pretend not to know the other. A man can spend a decade so braced for the next loss that he forgets a thing can simply be allowed to stay. I let it stay. I did not have a speech for it. I only had the grass and the gray light and a woman who had believed me when it cost her nothing and would have gained her nothing, back when belief in me was worth less than the mud on my boots, and I found that was more than enough to build the rest of a life on. There was a long way to fall for the men who had done the taking. It fell in the order such things fall, slowly at first, and then all at once, and then in writing. Lewis Hayes went first because the weak link always does. He had built the frame against Miguel the way a nervous man builds a lie, with too many parts, and every part had his fingerprints on it. The doctored sample report, the metadata on the leaked file that showed it was authored on his own machine, at his own desk, at 2:14 in the morning, 3 days before the sample it described was supposedly taken. The messages he had sent asking to be told when the problem would be cleaned up. I had all of it. I had photographed his screen a dozen mornings while he thought the old man was emptying the recycling. The league's integrity unit did not have to work hard. He had done their work for them in his own hand and kept a copy, because men like Lewis Hayes always keep a copy. Insurance against the day the men above them decide he is the one who takes the fall. He had been building a rope to save himself and made a noose instead. He was charged with fabricating evidence and perverting the integrity of the competition. The first time I had felt him near me, he had put his hand on my chest in a corridor and pushed me out of the way of a camera, and I had thought quietly, in the place where I keep the ledger, fail. It held. Scott Ramsey fell next, and he fell like a man who genuinely did not believe the ground was there. He had spent his whole life on the charming side of a boardroom table, and charm is a currency that only spends in one direction. The kickback was not subtle once you knew where it had gone. A consultancy that did no consulting. An invoice for advice that was never given. A payment routed through 3 names that all led back to the Sterling Group, and underneath the names, to Scott. He had sold the relocation to the board as salvation and taken a private fee for every soul he sold with it. The academy kids he had called charity cases. The ground staff he had called dead weight. Tom Adewale, who had folded that man's shirts and laid out his lanyard for 15 years, he had called the help. The league banned him. The financial authorities took the rest. What I remember is not his ruin. What I remember is that on his way out, past the trophy cabinet, he stopped and looked at the honors board where a name was already being restored, and for 1 second his face did something honest, and then he kept walking. Some men only ever tell the truth by accident. Fail. It held too. Elena Croft is the one I did not expect. She had called me the pensioner. She had called me the seat warmer, loudly, in front of the young ones, because status is a thing you can only feel by standing on someone. In the report card I read out under the floodlights, I had graded her the way I graded the rest. But when the room turned, when the board went pale and the cameras swung and the whole beautiful machine of the lie came apart in real time, she was the first one to flinch. I watched it happen. There is a moment when a thing you have helped build collapses, when you can either grab a beam and go down holding it or step back and let it fall. She stepped back. She came to find me 2 days later, not at dawn, she was not that kind, but in the corridor outside the medical room, and she had a slim folder held against her chest with both arms, like a schoolgirl with homework she was afraid to hand in. I kept things, she said. Dawson had me sit in on calls, to take notes, to make him look surrounded by important people. He never thought I was listening. She put the folder on the treatment table between us. It's all there. The dates, who was on the calls, what he said about you, about 12 years ago. She would not look at me. I told myself for years he'd cleaned up the club. It was easier than the other thing. And now? Now I've read my own notes. She finally looked up. I don't want to be furniture that pretends it can't see the room. I did not tell her she was forgiven, because that was not mine to give, and she had not asked for it. I told her the truth, which is harder and worth more. You flinched first, I said. That's not nothing. Give it to the integrity officers, not to me. She nodded and picked the folder up and carried it where it needed to go, and it was, in the end, the thing that sealed the deepest part of the case. Not a redemption, a correction. But the game is made of corrections, and I have never had the luxury of pretending otherwise. Marcus Sterling was destroyed by the only thing he had ever really trusted, which was leverage. He had built the Sterling Group the way his father built it before him, on the certainty that if you owned the outcome, the game itself did not matter. Fix the result, void the risk, take the money that other people were foolish enough to wager on a contest they thought was real. But leverage is a knife with a handle on both ends. The moment the fix was exposed, the moment it was on record that the outcome of the survival match had been arranged to fail, every bet the syndicate had placed on that arrangement became void. Not merely lost, void. The regulators froze the positions. The counterparties came for what they were owed on the assumption of a fair game that had, in the end, been made fair by an old man on a bench. The fund did not lose slowly. It imploded because it had never held anything but confidence, and confidence is the first thing to leave a room when the lights come on. And then the part that closed the circle. I had kept all those years more than the tape from the night they ended me. I had kept the ledger my father never knew he was keeping, the old programs, the team sheets, the paper trail of a working man who wrote everything down because no one else would write down men like him. And in it, once I knew to look, was Edward Sterling's name. The same playbook, run once against me and once against the whole club, a generation apart, with the same 3 moves. Rig the game, erase the honest man, own the result. The father had bankrolled the lie that took my name. The son had come back to take the ground my father tended. I did not have to say any of that from the touchline. I only had to lay the 2 frames side by side and let 11,000 people and every camera in the country see that they were the same drawing. The game bans for corruption of this order for life. It banned Marcus Sterling for life, and in the record of it, printed in the same league bulletin, it noted the corruption of Edward Sterling before him, so that the father's name went down beside the son's, 20 years late, exactly as long as it had taken. The circle did not open. It closed. Some doors you do not get to slam. You only get to watch them shut, quietly, from a training pitch at dawn, and know they will not open again. Which leaves Arthur Dawson, and Dawson I saved for last because his sentence was not a charge. His sentence was the truth, out loud, in his own mouth. For 12 years, his crime had been the one thing I could not prove past the frame he had built so carefully. He had been too clever to sign the lie himself, and had let Edward Sterling's money and Lewis Hayes's forebears do the dirty part. But a man who builds his whole life on being the savior keeps the receipts of his own heroism, and the tape from that night, the one I had carried through every cold changing room in every forgotten league in the country, was, in the end, provable. Voices are provable. Dates are provable. The recording of Arthur Dawson telling a room full of men that the honest one had to go because the honest one could not be bought, that is provable when you finally play it in a place where people are made to listen. The league struck his name from the story he had written for himself. He had been the man who cleaned up the club. Now the record showed what the cleaning had been. They banned him from the game for the rest of his life, which for Arthur Dawson was the game taking back the only self he had ever valued. But that was not the sentence I cared about. I did not want him in a cell. I wanted him in a corridor. Because when they restored my name to the honors board, when the club sent a man up a ladder with a small brush, and the years the lie had stolen were painted back, Adrian Kane, and beneath it, the record, and beside it the seasons that had been left blank as if I had died, filled in now with the truth, they asked Dawson to be present. Not as punishment, as record. And he stood in that corridor beneath the board where his lie had erased me, and he was made to say it, out loud, to me, and to the room, and to the small camera the league kept running for the file. I did it, he said. His voice was not the voice that had held court with the press. It was an old man's voice, which is what it had been all along, under the tailoring. I planted the evidence. He never threw a game in his life. I ended his career because he wouldn't be moved, and I let the club call me its savior for 12 years, and it was a lie. He looked at the board. He could not look at me. The game doesn't remember old men, he said, almost to himself, the old line, the only prayer he had. It's about to remember you, I said, for exactly what you did. That was the whole of my revenge on Arthur Dawson. Not his ruin, his accuracy. I made him true once, at the end, in front of the name he had tried to erase, and then I let him go, because I had a training ground to get to. The warm things came after, the way they should, once the cold work is done. Justice, done right, is not a fire. It is a ledger balanced. Every one of them got exactly what he had built, and not 1 ounce more. Not because I was gentle, but because cruelty would have made me one of them, and I had spent 12 years refusing to become the thing that broke me. You do not answer a rigged game by rigging it back. You answer it by making it fair, once, in front of everyone, and letting fairness do what it does to men who have only ever survived by bending it. They saved the academy. Not the way Ramsey had promised to save it, not sold, not stripped, not relocated to a car park on the far side of a motorway with a 5-year plan and a demolition date. They put it into a community trust, the fans and the old staff and the club together, so that no financier's son could ever come again with a coat to hand to an old man and a plan to sell the ground out from under the kids who trained on it. The ground staff kept their jobs. Tom kept his kit room. The academy kept its lights on at dawn, which is the only hour that has ever mattered. And they gave it a name. I did not ask for it. I want that on the record too, in a ledger someone can actually read this time. It was Miguel who asked, and the fans who carried it, and the trust who voted it, and when they came to tell me I had to go and stand on the empty pitch for a while before I could answer. The Sol Kane Academy. My father's name, over the gate, in letters a working man would never have believed he'd earn. The groundskeeper who coached the kids for nothing, who raked the same 6 yards every dawn for 40 years, who taught his son that the game remembers the ones who love it even when the scoreboard forgets. They struck a working man's name off no board because they never troubled to write it down. Now it is over the gate. Now the kids who love the game the way he loved it walk under it every morning to get to the grass. If there is a heaven for men who rake dew off penalty spots, mine looked down and, for the first time in a long time, I think he stopped worrying about me. They made Tom Adewale a legend, and they made him one properly, not with a plaque he'd have hated, but with respect, which is the only currency Tom ever wanted and the one nobody had ever thought to pay him. 15 years he had laid out other men's shirts. 15 years he had known everything about that club because kit men, like veterans, are furniture that used to run, and people say anything in front of the furniture. He was the one who had known me first, a signature first touch on a training pitch, a pair of boots with AK worn into the leather, a scar he remembered from a match program he'd kept for 20 years because Tom Adewale keeps everything, God bless him. They gave him a title with the word legend in it, and a contract for life, and a seat in the director's box he refused because he wanted to sit with the kit, and the club let him, because they had finally learned who they were. Pass. It had always been pass. It just took them 12 years to read the grade. And Miguel. They made him the club's new star, which the whole country already knew he was going to be, and they made him academy captain, which mattered more, because the star is what the cameras get, and the captain is what the young ones get. He came to me the morning after they announced it, out on the grass at dawn, because he had started coming at dawn. And I understood then that the chain I had spent a decade guarding had found its next link on its own. Teach me, he said. Not the goals. He could already do the goals. Teach me the other thing, how to see the room, how to know who people are. So I taught him the ledger, not to be cruel with him, never that, to be awake. You watch how a man treats the kit man and the academy kid and the old veteran nobody's picked, because that is who he actually is. And you can't see it until he's decided you're no one and stopped performing. I told him to grade quietly, and forgive where he could, and remember where he couldn't, and never, ever let anyone convince him that the powerless are furniture. He listened the way I once listened to a man with a rake. And I watched the gift pass from my hands to his the way it was always meant to, not in a trophy, not on a scoreboard, but on an empty pitch at dawn, one old player to one young one. The whole invisible history of the game changing hands where no floodlight reaches. Then I hung up my boots, on my own terms, in my own time. Not driven out this time, not erased, not carried off on a stretcher of someone else's lie. I laced them one last time, exactly even, played the last 20 minutes of a match that did not matter to the table and mattered to me more than any record ever had, and walked off when I chose to a stadium that stood, and set the boots down in Tom's kit room with the AK facing out. I have the record still. 22 years now, and no one has broken it. I have stopped caring whether they do. A record is just a scoreboard's memory, and I have learned the hard way how little a scoreboard remembers. But I did not leave the grass. I come at dawn. Every morning I come to the Alistair Finch Academy while the dew is still down and the light is still gray, and I coach the kids nobody's picked yet. The small ones, the slow-starting ones, the ones with more heart than highlight, the ones a scout would call furniture, and I know better than to. I tape a few ankles. I set out a few cones. I stand where my father stood, on grass he'd have loved, under a gate with his name on it, and I teach children whose names are not on any board yet what the work is and where it lives. Arthur Dawson had a line. He said it for 12 years, and he said it once more in a corridor with his hero's coat finally off, and even then he did not understand it. He was right. The game doesn't remember old men. It remembers what you do when the whistle goes and no one has picked you. So I stopped waiting to be picked. I put my name back where it belonged, not on the scoreboard, where the cameras look, but on the training pitch at dawn, where the work is, where no floodlight ever reaches. You find out what a player is made of at dawn, on an empty pitch, when the stands are empty and only the work is left. So am I. Pass.